Hey friends, glad you're here at OmniWizard. We've cooked up something special. What if Harry Potter was taken by Superman and Batman when Dumbledore abandoned him at Dursleys? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1. The night someone was watching the owl arrived at 10:30. It swept over Little Winging in that particular November dark that feels less like absence of light and more like presence of something heavier. A cold, dense nothing that presses against windows and makes people pull their curtains without quite knowing why. The owl didn't care about the dark. It banked left over a row of identical houses, each with its identical car in its identical driveway, and dropped a letter onto the doorstep of number 4 Privet Drive with the practiced indifference of a postal worker on his last route of the day. Then it left. The letter sat there for approximately 40 seconds before a tall man in a purple traveling cloak materialized at the end of the garden path. He did not appear dramatically. He did not crack into existence with a sound like a thunderclap. He simply wasn't there, and then he was, the way a thought arrives, sudden and complete. He walked toward the door with the careful, deliberate pace of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times and still wasn't entirely comfortable with it. Albus Dumbledore picked up the letter, looked at it for a moment, and tucked it into his cloak. He produced a small silver device from his pocket, something that looked like a cigarette lighter but wasn't, and clicked it once. Twice. The street lamps along Privet Drive went dark in sequence, each one swallowing its light like a man closing his eyes. The street became very quiet. He stood there in the darkness for a long moment, looking at the door. Then he sat down on the low garden wall and waited. He didn't wait long. A motorcycle descended from the sky with a sound like controlled thunder, its headlight cutting a pale channel through the dark. It settled onto the road in front of number 4 with the surprising grace of something large and powerful being handled by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The engine cut. The silence that followed felt enormous. Rubeus Hagrid climbed off the bike. He was enormous himself, not in the way that makes people nervous, but in the way that makes them feel, inexplicably, safer. He was carrying a bundle wrapped in blankets the color of autumn leaves, and he was holding it with both arms, close to his chest, with the specific careful tenderness of someone who understood that the thing they were carrying was the most important thing in the world. "Professor Dumbledore, sir," Hagrid said. His voice was rough and low. He'd been crying recently. The evidence was all over his face, raw and honest the way Hagrid always was about everything. "Got him here safe and sound, like you asked. Picked him up from the ruins myself. Thank you, Rubeus." Dumbledore rose from the wall. "You can leave the motorcycle here. Sirius will collect it eventually." Hagrid looked down at the bundle in his arms. The blankets shifted slightly, and a small sound emerged, not crying exactly, more an exploratory noise, the kind an infant makes when they're testing the world to see if it's still there. "Professor," Hagrid said, and his voice had changed. Lower now. "Are you sure about this? Leaving him here with these people? They're muggles, sir. Petunia Dursley, she never had much love for her sister, from what I heard. And the husband, well, Harry will be safer here than anywhere else in our world," Dumbledore said. He held out his hands, and there was a gentle inevitability to the gesture that was, perhaps, its most troubling quality. A blood protection unlike anything that can be replicated. His mother's sacrifice runs through her sister's veins. As long as Harry can call this house home, no dark magic can touch him. Hagrid looked at the house again. It was not a house that invited warmth. The garden was immaculate in the joyless way of someone who views tidiness as a form of moral judgment. The curtains were thick and beige and completely closed. Somewhere inside, a television murmured. "He deserves better'n a doorstep, Professor," Hagrid said. "He deserves a great many things," Dumbledore agreed quietly, "and the world will owe him a great many things. But tonight what matters most is that he is alive to one day collect that debt." Hagrid stood there for another 3 seconds. Then very slowly he transferred the bundle into Dumbledore's arms. He stepped back. His hands lingered in the air for a moment after, like they hadn't gotten the message yet. "Couldn't I just stay and see him settled at least? Wait until they open the door and, good night, Rubeus." There was kindness in the voice, but it was the kind of kindness that closes doors. Hagrid nodded. He looked at the bundle one more time. Then he climbed back onto the motorbike, started the engine, and drove away down the road. At the end of the street, the motorcycle lifted. In seconds it was gone. Dumbledore stood alone in the middle of the dark street, holding an 11-month-old child who had survived something that should have been unsurvivable. He looked down at the boy's face. Harry Potter was awake, it turned out. Dark eyes looked up at him with an expression that babies sometimes have, that uncanny focused attention that makes you feel they understand far more than they're letting on. There was a lightning bolt cut into his forehead, fresh and red and already beginning to scar. You will understand one day, Dumbledore said softly. What was sacrificed, what was necessary, I hope you will forgive me for it. Harry Potter reached up and grabbed the end of Dumbledore's long silver beard. Dumbledore gently freed himself. He walked up the path to the front door of number 4 Privet Drive. He set the bundle down, carefully, gently, on the cold stone doorstep. He tucked a letter addressed to Miss Petunia Dursley underneath the edge of the blanket. He straightened up. He stood there for a moment, and something moved across his face that might have been doubt, just a flicker, quickly resolved, and then he turned and walked away. He reached the end of the garden path. He didn't look back. He was gone. The street was very quiet. Harry Potter lay on the cold doorstep and made no sound. The wind moved down Privet Drive with nothing to stop it, carrying that wet cold smell of late October giving way to November. The blankets were warm and thick, but they were not a house. They were not arms, 11 months old, lightning scar, eyes that tracked the darkness above him with that disconcerting infant focus. He did not cry. Above Little Winging, high enough that the city lights below were a gentle amber smear against the black, 2 figures hung in the air. One of them was floating. He didn't need to. It wasn't effort that kept him there. It was simply his default state. The way standing is a default for everyone else. The man was tall and broad-shouldered in a way that the dark blue uniform somehow didn't exaggerate, and the yellow shield on his chest caught what little light existed up here and held it. His arms were crossed. He was looking down. The other man wasn't floating at all. He was standing on the roof of the building across the street, a 2-story office block that housed a dentist's practice during business hours, crouched on its edge with the particular still-but-ready posture of something that has been watching for a long time. The cape moved slightly in the wind. The cowl kept his face in shadow, which, given his current expression, was probably a mercy for anyone in the vicinity. He left him on the doorstep, Clark said. His voice was very quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from not having anything to say, the other kind. I can see that, Bruce said. On the doorstep, Bruce. He's 11 months old, it's 43 degrees. I know, he just walked away, he didn't even. Clark stopped. His jaw tightened. He set him down like a package. Below them on the cold stone step, Harry Potter made a small sound, not distress, not quite, more like he was narrating the situation to himself in a language no one had invented yet. That's Albus Dumbledore, Bruce said. It wasn't a question. He'd done his research before they came here. The League had been aware of the magical world for several years. It was impossible not to be, when you were the kind of people who dealt in the impossible for a living. Dumbledore was a name that appeared in certain files under certain circumstances, attached to words like preeminent and unparalleled, and once in a document that Barry had circled 3 times in red ink, operates according to his own moral calculus. I know who he is, Clark said, and right now I don't particularly care. He believes the blood protection is real. He believes that child is safer here, with those people, than anywhere in their world. From his perspective, he's making the rational choice. He's making the choice that's convenient for him, Clark said. The temperature near him had dropped slightly, an involuntary thing, something that happened when he was angry. He needs that child to grow up away from magic, away from any knowledge of who he is, away from anyone who might teach him his own worth. He needs him manageable. He needs him grateful. Silence. You've been thinking about this longer than the last 5 minutes, Bruce said. I felt the surge when it happened. Magical discharge from whatever Voldemort attempted tonight. Clark had talked to John Constantine twice and Zatanna once about the mechanics of magical energy, and what he'd taken from those conversations was that even he, with all his senses extended to their limit, could only perceive magic the way you perceive weather. You knew it was happening, but you couldn't see all of it. I felt it 40 miles away. I came to see. I watched him pick up the baby. I watched him fly here on that motorcycle. And I watched Dumbledore set that child down on a cold step and walk away. Clark, that's his name down there, Harry. His name is Harry Potter, and his parents died tonight, and a man who calls himself his protector just left him on a doorstep at 43 degrees and walked away without looking back. Below, something changed. Bruce's eyes, which missed nothing, caught it first. Harry Potter had turned his head. He was looking up, not at the sky in the unfocused way infants look at things, but with that strange directed attention, and his eyes were moving between 2 points above him with the deliberate tracking of someone who knew, somehow, that there was something there to look at. He can see us, Clark said, with a note in his voice that wasn't quite surprise. He can sense something, Bruce said. The magic in him, maybe, or something else. He was quiet for a moment. He's not crying. Most children that age in that situation, I know. The wind moved again. The letter tucked under the blanket shifted, and for a moment it looked like it might blow away, and then it settled. The television inside number 4 murmured on. no one inside had any idea. No one inside had opened their door or their curtain, or given any sign that they were aware the course of their comfortable, private, deliberately ordinary lives was about to change. Bruce stared at the front door of number 4 for a long time. He was thinking. Clark had learned over the years to recognize the quality of Bruce's silences. This one had a specific texture to it, a kind of settling, the way concrete sets when it's made up its mind. "Don't," Clark said. "I'm not doing anything. You have that face. I'm wearing a mask. You always have that face under it." Clark dropped out of the sky and landed on the rooftop beside him without a sound. He crouched down to Bruce's level and looked at him directly. "Bruce. We can't just, he's not, this isn't a Justice League situation. There are people responsible for this child. There are systems. There is a baby on a doorstep," Bruce said, "and a blood protection spell that requires the child to call that house his home, which means he will be returned there whenever he tries to escape, which means those people inside have complete and total power over him, and Albus Dumbledore has designed the situation so that no one from the magical world will come looking." He paused. "Those people haven't opened their door. It's nearly 11 at night. She's his Aunt Clark. If I put my nephew on my doorstep and rang the bell, my sister-in-law would open the door." He looked at the house. "She hasn't." Clark looked at the house too. He could hear everything inside it. Did it without thinking, the way you listen harder when you're worried. The television. Vernon Dursley snoring in front of it. Petunia Dursley in the kitchen, washing up with the anxious efficiency of someone who uses activity to avoid thought. A child, Dudley, 14 months old, asleep upstairs. The regular sounds of a house that has locked itself against the world. "She knows he's out there," Clark said. His voice had gone very quiet again. "She read the letter. She knows." Bruce said nothing for a moment. He was looking at something else now, not the door but the letterbox, the small brass slot for mail, the way the letter was tucked under the blanket. Then he stood up. "Bruce, I'm going to pick him up." "And then what?" The question sat in the cold air between them. It was not a rhetorical question. It was, Clark knew, the question, the one that answered everything else. Bruce looked down at Harry Potter on his cold doorstep, 11 months old, eyes still searching the darkness above him with that uncanny attention. A scar on his forehead like a story written in the language of pain, and a whole life that someone had already decided the shape of, without ever asking him. "And then," Bruce said, "I raise him." Clark stared at him. "You raise him?" "Yes, you, Bruce Wayne, you raise a baby." "I raised Dick." Dick was 9 and could already do a triple backflip. "This is an infant. I'll learn." "Bruce, he's not going in that house, Clark." The words were quiet and completely without compromise. "You heard her in there. You know she's going to open that door eventually and take him in because she's afraid of what Dumbledore's letter says will happen if she doesn't, and she's going to resent every single day of it, and he's going to grow up knowing exactly what he is to her. You've seen that story before." "So have I." Something shifted behind his eyes, a flash of something old and specific. "I'm not leaving a child on a doorstep." Clark was quiet. He looked at the small shape in the blankets below. At the old letter from a dead woman's sister, still tucked against the cold stone. At the lights of little winging going on and on and on in every direction, all of them turned inward, none of them watching. "Alfred," Clark said, "is going to lose his mind." "Alfred," Bruce said, "lost his mind the day I put on the mask. He's been managing fine. You need to think about this. You need to think about what it means for him. He's going to grow up between two worlds, Bruce. The magical world will come looking eventually." "Good." Bruce stepped off the edge of the building. He dropped 2 stories without a sound, landed in a crouch on the pavement, and straightened up. He crossed the street in 8 quick strides. He looked down at Harry Potter. Harry Potter looked up at him. For a moment neither of them moved. Bruce, kneeling on the cold pavement in his full armor, the cape pooling around him, looking at a child looking back at him with absolutely no fear whatsoever. Most people, confronted with the Batman at close range in the dark, had at minimum a visceral alarm response. This 11-month-old was looking at him with what could only be described as interested assessment. Bruce reached out and picked him up. Harry fit against his chest with the uncomplaining ease of an infant being held by capable arms, which Bruce had read he had, in the last 4 minutes while Clark was talking, run through everything he could recall from the developmental psychology texts he'd read years ago for profiling purposes, was largely what they responded to. Warmth, steadiness, presence. He pulled the blankets tighter. He stood up. Clark landed next to him a moment later, silently. He looked at the baby. The baby looked at him. Then, with the absolute monarchical authority of an infant who has decided something, Harry Potter reached out one small hand toward the yellow shield on Clark's chest and made a grabbing motion. Clark made a sound that was, briefly, not a sound Bruce had ever heard him make in 15 years of knowing him. He recovered quickly. He likes the S, Clark said. He's reaching toward bright objects. It's developmental. He is absolutely reaching toward the S specifically. Clark, yeah, the letter. Bruce nodded toward the doorstep. Take it. If Dumbledore comes back, I don't want him to find an empty step and no trail. Clark picked up the letter. He looked at it, Miss Petunia Dursley, in spidery copperplate, and then he put it inside his cape. We should also, Bruce said, figure out how to replicate the blood protection or nullify the binding, or I know someone, Clark said. Zatanna, and John if we need someone who doesn't mind getting their hands dirty with the dark stuff. We'll need to be careful. Dumbledore's the most powerful wizard alive. He is, Clark agreed. He fell into step beside Bruce as they moved back toward the shadow between buildings. He's also been operating under the assumption that no one with our resources knew what happened tonight. He'll have contingencies for the magical world. He won't have contingencies for us. Bruce said nothing for a moment. He was looking down at Harry again. The baby had found the edge of his cape and was investigating it with single-minded scientific focus. He's going to need a name, Clark said. I mean his name is Harry Potter, but he's going to need, he keeps his name, Bruce said immediately. Both of them, he's Harry Potter. He'll know exactly who he is and where he comes from and what happened to his parents. All of it when he's old enough, no secrets. That's very unlike you. I know what happens, Bruce said quietly, when you build a life on a secret someone else decided you should keep. The shadows swallowed them. On Privet Drive, the empty doorstep was cold and perfectly clean. Inside number 4, the television murmured. Petunia Dursley would open her front door in the morning, see nothing but cold stone, and find the letter in her letterbox 3 days later, forwarded somehow without a return address, carrying only a single extra line in Dumbledore's handwriting at the bottom. The boy is safe. He will not be coming to you. I trust, given your feelings on the matter, this will come as some relief. She would stand in her kitchen and read it twice, and Vernon would ask what it was, and she would say nothing at all, and put it in the bin and never speak of it again. Alfred Pennyworth opened the back door of Wayne Manor at 11:47 p.m., took one look at what Bruce was carrying and said, absolutely not. Alfred, no, Master Bruce. He had nowhere else to go. That is, Alfred said, categorically the same sentence you used about the circus child, the 3 raccoons in 2019, and I cannot stress this enough, the trained bear you brought back from Metropolis that one time. He's a baby, Alfred, not a bear. The bear, Alfred said, also looked at me with those eyes and was considerably easier to manage than you seem to believe this is going to be. He looked at Harry. Harry looked back at him. Alfred's expression went through several distinct phases in rapid succession: resistance, consideration, reluctant softening, and then something that was simply irreversibly lost. What is his name? Harry, Bruce said. Harry Potter. Alfred was still for a moment. The Potter child. The one they're saying survived. He stopped. You were there tonight. We were nearby. Alfred looked at Clark, who was standing just behind Bruce with his cape over his civilian clothes and his hands in his pockets. Mr. Kent, evening, Alfred. You allowed him to do this. I am also doing this, Clark said. I'll help. Alfred looked at Bruce. He looked at Harry. He looked at the manor behind him, the vast, drafty, beautiful, entirely inappropriate environment for raising a child with its secret cave underneath and its particular atmosphere of disciplined Gothic intensity. He will need a nursery, Alfred said. Yes, and formula, and appropriate clothing. And a physician who understands the concept of discretion. I know. And you, Alfred said, fixing Bruce with the look that had survived 15 years of Batman, will need to understand that whatever strategies you apply to crime fighting, intimidation, and the general project of inspiring terror in Gotham's criminal population do not, under any circumstances, apply to the raising of children. I raised Dick. You taught a traumatized 9-year-old to fight crime, Alfred said. We will not be doing that. He might want to eventually. He is 11 months old, Master Bruce. The ambitions of this household will be adjusted accordingly. Alfred straightened. He reached out and without asking, with the practiced assurance of someone who had held many children over the course of a long and varied life, he took Harry from Bruce's arms. Harry went without protest. He looked up at Alfred's face, the precise silver mustache, the careful eyes, the expression of someone who had seen everything and expected very little and was routinely surprised, and made a sound of cheerful investigation. Hello, Alfred said. His voice had changed. It was exactly the same voice, but softer in a specific structural way, the way an old house settles differently when it's warm. I expect you're hungry. Harry made another sound. Yes, Alfred said. That's what I thought. Come along. He looked back over his shoulder. Master Bruce, the third guest room. You'll need to start clearing it tonight. Bruce looked at the back of Alfred's head as the old man carried Harry away through the warm light of the manor's kitchen. Something happened in his expression that he would have been deeply uncomfortable with anyone seeing, which was perhaps why Clark, standing beside him, said nothing about it. They stood there for a moment in the cold November air. "You know Dumbledore's going to come looking eventually," Clark said. "I know. The magical world is going to want him. He's the symbol of their victory over Voldemort. They're going to want to claim that." "I know," Bruce said again. "Let them come." Clark looked at the sky. From here you could see the stars, not many, not this close to the city, but a few of the bright ones pushed through. "I'll talk to Zatanna about the blood protection," he said. "If there's a way to ensure he's still covered by Lily Potter's magic without being anchored to Privet Drive." "Constantine," Bruce said, "not just Zatanna. This is the kind of thing that requires someone with no respect for conventional boundaries. You have zero standing to complain about other people's lack of respect for conventional boundaries." "I never said I was complaining." Bruce turned and walked toward the door. "We'll start the paperwork in the morning. Legal guardianship. It needs to be airtight." "Bruce," Clark said his name with a specific weight, "are you ready for this? Because I need you to actually think about that question and answer it, not just move to the next step." Bruce stopped in the doorway. The light from the kitchen caught the edge of his profile. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm doing it anyway." He looked back. "Isn't that usually how it works?" Clark thought about Smallville. About a couple in Kansas who had seen a light falling from the sky and made a choice without knowing what it would cost them or what it would build. About what it meant to raise something you didn't entirely understand, to look at something strange and luminous and fragile and say, "This is mine to protect." "Yeah," Clark said, "that's usually how it works." In the kitchen of Wayne Manor, Alfred Pennyworth sat in the chair by the warm stove with Harry Potter in his arms, feeding him carefully from a bottle he'd improvised with practiced calm. Harry ate with focused determination, the way people do when they've had a difficult evening and have decided to be sensible about it. "You are going to be," Alfred said, in the considered tone of a man thinking out loud, "an enormous amount of work." Harry paused, looked up at him, and then went back to eating. "Yes," Alfred said, "that's more or less what I expected." He looked at the lightning bolt on the boy's forehead, red and raw and somehow already looking like it intended to be permanent. Something moved across his face. "Whatever they've planned for you," he said, very quietly, "this place is kinder. I should like you to know that, for whatever it's worth." Harry finished the bottle. He looked up at Alfred with enormous dark eyes, then he yawned. Alfred gathered him carefully against his shoulder and stood up and carried him toward the warm interior of the house, switching off the kitchen light behind him. The manor settled into quiet around them. Outside, the November dark pressed against the windows. In the cave beneath Wayne Manor, a computer screen still glowed with open files, 3 separate encrypted searches, running simultaneously. One for Lily Potter, née Evans, magical researcher, last known publications. One for Tom Marvolo Riddle, magical identity, Lord Voldemort, full known history. And one, most recently opened, just 3 words long, Harry Potter, everything. Bruce Wayne sat down in front of the screen and started to read. He was there until 4 in the morning. In a great stone castle in Scotland, Albus Dumbledore sat behind his desk and looked at the candles burning down in their holders and thought about a doorstep in Surrey, and told himself, for the 100th time since he'd walked away, that he'd made the right choice. He believed it. He believed it completely. That was, perhaps, the most dangerous thing about him. Above his desk, the instruments that monitored the life signs and magical signatures of persons under his care sat in their glass cases, spinning their small brass arms in their designated patterns. He looked at the one calibrated to Harry Potter. It spun. It pulsed. The reading was, as expected, consistent with a child asleep in a house in Surrey, consistent with a child alive and safe. He breathed out and let the candles burn and went back to his own plans. He didn't look closely enough at the instrument to notice that the location signature was very slightly wrong. That what it was reading was not a child in a house in Surrey, but a very carefully worked piece of sympathetic magic, the kind Zatanna Zatara would produce for an old friend with a new problem on a cold night in November, leaving just enough of a trace to satisfy a distant observer while redirecting every real marker somewhere else entirely. He didn't notice. He wouldn't notice for years. And by the time he did, Harry Potter would be nothing like what he'd planned. Chapter 2, The Boy from Everywhere. 10 years is a long time to a child, and no time at all to the people raising one. Bruce Wayne had learned this the hard way, which was, Alfred frequently observed, the only way Bruce Wayne learned anything. He'd read 12 books on child development in the first month, annotated them, cross-referenced them, built a color-coded developmental timeline that Alfred had found on the kitchen table one morning and quietly put through the shredder. He'd consulted pediatricians under assumed names. He'd called Clark at 2 in the morning 3 times in the first week about things that turned out to be completely normal infant behavior, and Clark had answered every time without complaint, because Clark Kent was, beneath the cape and the invulnerability, the single most patient person Bruce had ever encountered. By the end of the first year, Bruce had stopped reading the books. Not because he'd given up, because Harry had made them obsolete. The first time it happened, Harry was 14 months old. Bruce was in the cave. It was past midnight. Harry was asleep. Alfred was asleep. The manor was quiet in the way it got when every room had finally exhaled. Bruce was at the computer, working through surveillance footage from the East End, when the monitor showing the nursery feed flickered. He looked up. Harry was awake. He'd pulled himself to standing in his crib, which he'd been doing for about 3 weeks now with increasing confidence, and he was looking at something in the corner of the room. Not anxiously, the way children sometimes stare at corners in the night and make their parents' skin crawl, but with that interested, focused look he'd had on the doorstep of Privet Drive, the one that suggested he was filing information. Then the mobile above his crib, the one Alfred had hung there, small silver stars on thin threads, began to move. There was no window open, no vent nearby, no draft that Bruce could identify on the environmental readouts he'd set up in the nursery after the 3rd time he'd found Harry inexplicably on the other side of his crib from where he'd been put down. The stars moved. They arranged themselves slowly into a rough circle. Then they stopped. Harry made a satisfied sound. He sat down, curled up, and went back to sleep. Bruce stared at the feed for a long time. Then he called Clark. "I know," Clark said before Bruce said anything. "I felt it from here. He's 14 months old. I know, the books don't." "Bruce," Clark said in the tone he used when he wanted Bruce to stop processing and start listening. "He's a wizard. His parents were among the most powerful magical people alive. Of course this is happening. The question isn't whether his magic is manifesting. The question is what we do about it. I've been in contact with Zatanna," Bruce said. "She says uncontrolled magic in children his age is normal in their world. It's called accidental magic. Usually it's harmless. Usually." "Usually," Clark repeated. "There was a case in 1962. A child in Manchester turned his teacher's hair blue. A case in 1978. I don't need the historical survey. There was a case in 1987 where a child with abnormally high magical potential and no training caused a structural collapse." Silence. "Zatanna," Clark said. "We need to bring her in properly, not just for the location misdirection. We need someone who can actually teach him, guide him through it. She's willing. She's been willing since November. I've been cautious." "Why?" "Because the more people who know where Harry is," Bruce said, "the higher the chance that information reaches the wrong ears." Another silence, different from the first. "You've been running this like an operation," Clark said, not accusing, just naming it. "It's the only way I know." "I know," a pause, "but he's not an asset to protect, Bruce. He's a kid." Bruce looked at the nursery feed. Harry, asleep now, entirely peaceful, the mobile still above him with its stars in their new arrangement. "I know what he is," Bruce said quietly. "Then let's raise him like it." Zatanna came 3 days later. She arrived at the front door of Wayne Manor in ordinary clothes, dark jeans, a jacket, hair pulled back, which was how she always arrived somewhere she wasn't performing, and which Alfred, opening the door, greeted with the same impeccable courtesy he afforded everyone regardless of how they arrived and what they could do. "Mr. Pennyworth," she said. "Miss Zatara. He's in the garden." Harry was, in fact, in the garden, sitting in the middle of the lawn in the pale December sun with an expression of intense concentration, apparently attempting to levitate a stick. He had been at this for approximately 40 minutes, Bruce estimated from the security logs, with mounting focus and 0 success, and showed no signs of stopping. Zatanna crouched down next to him. She was quiet for a moment, watching. "He's doing it wrong," she said. "He's 14 months old," Bruce said. "He doesn't know there's a right way. There isn't actually, that's my point." She looked at Harry. "Hey, bud." Harry looked at her. His expression shifted, the assessment, always the assessment, looking at this new person and filing her, and then he held the stick out toward her. "He wants you to try," Bruce said. "I know," she smiled. She took the stick, held it flat on her open palm, and said something backward, quick and fluid. The stick rose an inch off her palm, hovered, came back down. She gave it back to Harry. "Your turn." Harry looked at the stick. He looked at his palm. He put the stick on his palm, flat, the same way she'd done it. The stick rose, not an inch, 3 inches. It held there, wobbling slightly, for 5 full seconds and then dropped. Harry made a triumphant sound. "Oh," Bruce said very carefully. "He was trying to push it," Zatanna said, standing back up. He needs to. It's not force, it's more like asking. Most kids his age can't even conceptualize that distinction. She looked at Bruce with an expression that was somewhere between impressed and concerned. Bruce, he's exceptional. I don't mean that as a compliment necessarily. I mean it as a variable you need to account for. I'm accounting for it. He's going to need more than I can give him in a few years. He's going to need real training. There are schools in their world. I know about the schools. Dumbledore runs the best one. I know. She looked at him steadily. You have a plan. I always have a plan. Does the plan include the part where Dumbledore finds out the child he left on a Surrey doorstep has been living in Wayne Manor for the last year? That part, Bruce said, comes later. Later turned out to be 10 years of careful, deliberate, joyful chaos. Harry Potter grew up in 3 places simultaneously, which meant he belonged to all of them and was entirely himself in each. Wayne Manor was where he learned to think. Bruce was relentless in the best possible sense, not the cold, mechanical relentlessness of someone who'd weaponized their intellect, but the kind that demanded Harry meet every problem head-on, look at it from every angle, and never, ever settle for the first answer. By 7, Harry was playing chess at a level that gave Alfred genuine competition. By 8, he'd taken apart and reassembled 2 of Alfred's antique clocks. By 9, he was reading Bruce's case files, the ones Bruce let him see, which were the ones involving closed investigations and historical patterns, and pointing out things that made Bruce stop and look at him very carefully. How did you know that? Bruce said once, about a connection Harry had drawn between a series of seemingly unrelated financial irregularities in a 15-year-old Gotham smuggling case. Harry shrugged. The dates don't match the imports. If you look at the shipping manifests and then look at the actual cargo receipts, they're off by a pattern. It's not random. Someone adjusted them by the same amount each time, which means it's not a mistake, it's a code. He looked up. Is that not obvious? Bruce had in fact noticed the same thing. 14 months after acquiring the case files and building a full analytical framework, Harry had noticed it in 20 minutes. Yes, Bruce said. That's exactly right. And he had looked at the ceiling for a moment and thought, we're going to need bigger chess problems. The Kent farm in Smallville was where Harry learned to breathe. Clark's parents had taken to Harry with a warmth that shouldn't have surprised Bruce but somehow always did. Martha Kent had the specific gift of making anyone who walked through her door feel like they'd been expected and were deeply welcome, and Jonathan Kent had the gift of talking to children like they were people, which is rarer than it should be. Harry had his own room in the farmhouse by the time he was 3, yellow curtains, because he'd asked for yellow, a choice that Martha had praised and Jonathan had admired without comment, and he spent summers there and most of Christmas, and whenever the relentless pace of Wayne Manor got too much for a small person to carry, he and Clark would fly together. Not Harry couldn't fly. His magic didn't work that way, or at least it hadn't yet. But Clark would take him up, Harry's arms around his neck and the world below them going quiet and enormous, and they would go high enough that the curve of the earth became visible, and Harry would go silent the way he only did when something had genuinely reached him somewhere deep. What are you thinking about? Clark asked once, when Harry was 7 and they were floating above Kansas at an altitude that would have required supplemental oxygen for anyone else. About how small everything looks, Harry said, and how it doesn't actually make the things down there smaller. They're still the same size, it's just perspective. Clark looked at him sideways. Yeah, exactly. So what's the point of perspective if it doesn't actually tell you the truth about the size of things? It doesn't tell you the size, Clark said. It tells you the distance. Harry thought about that for a long time. That's the same problem as knowing something is dangerous but not being afraid of it, he said eventually. Is it? You know the distance. You know what it could do, but you're not scared of it because you can see that it's distant. That's perspective. He looked at Clark. Does that ever stop working? When the thing gets close enough? Clark thought about a green rock in a lead box in the Batcave. He thought about a red sun. He thought about a dozen other things. Sometimes, he said honestly, that's when you need someone standing next to you. Harry seemed satisfied with that. He looked back at the curve of the earth. Okay, he said, that makes sense. Zatanna's apartment in New York was where Harry learned magic. This was, of all 3 places, the one that revealed the most about who Harry Potter actually was, because magic, unlike analytical thinking, and unlike the patient wisdom you accumulated from a farm in Kansas, refused to be learned. It had to be inhabited. You had to get out of your own way and let it move through you, which meant it exposed every block and fear and self-imposed limitation with a thoroughness that made therapy look superficial. Harry had no blocks. This was unusual. Most young magical practitioners Zatanna had worked with, and she'd worked with a few, discreetly, over the years, had at minimum the ordinary human resistance to believing in things they couldn't fully explain. Harry had grown up with Clark Kent picking him up from soccer practice in a car, same as any other parent, and also occasionally floating 6 inches off the ground in the kitchen when he forgot himself while cooking. He had grown up in a house with a secret cave and a man who dressed as a giant bat, and also sat with him patiently every night for an hour reading whatever Harry was currently interested in, no matter how esoteric. Harry Potter's capacity for accepting the extraordinary was essentially unlimited. So when Zatanna put a wand in his hand for the first time at age 7 and said, "Imagine what you want the candle to do," Harry looked at the candle, and the candle didn't just light, it blazed, a column of warm gold fire 3 feet high, controlled and steady with no visible effort. Zatanna blinked. "Do it again," she said. "Different candle, and this time restrain it, half that height." Harry did it again, half the height, exactly. Again, a third, precise. She sat back in her chair. "How long have you been practicing?" "I haven't," Harry said. "This is the first time." She looked at the wand. It was a temporary one she used for teaching, not calibrated to him. "We need to get you a proper wand," she said. "Come to think of it, I need to call someone." The someone she called was a wand maker who operated out of a small shop in a magical district in New Orleans, and who looked at Harry with the professional calm of someone who had seen many interesting things in their career and was prepared to add this to the list. 3 hours and 11 wands later, they found the one holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, pliable, and when Harry held it and gave it a wave, every object in the shop rose 6 inches off its surface simultaneously. "Remarkable," the wand maker said. "Is that normal?" Bruce asked. "No," the wand maker said. "That is not normal. Good or bad, not normal. That," the wand maker said carefully, "depends entirely on the person holding it." By the time Harry was 11, he had read everything Zatanna owned that was appropriate for someone his age, and a fair amount that wasn't, and could perform spells that Zatanna had been genuinely surprised by, and had also developed the habit, the deeply, specifically Harry habit, of taking any piece of magic he learned and immediately asking, "Why does it work? What's the mechanism? What are its limits?" Zatanna loved this about him. It reminded her of her father, the way his mind moved. It also occasionally drove her insane, which she suspected was also something her father would have recognized. He was not a small person. Not physically, he was, at 11, already carrying the promise of his eventual height, the build of someone who would be tall and lean and quick, but not small in any other sense either. He walked into rooms the way Bruce had taught him to walk into rooms, which was, like you were entitled to be there, not because of arrogance, but because you decided it was true and decided it completely. He had Clark's eyes, not the color, his were his mother's green, but the quality of them, that warm, level attention that made people feel fully seen without feeling interrogated. He had his own laugh, loud and sudden and entirely uncontrolled, which Alfred had once described as the only thing in this manner that has never learned discretion, and which Bruce had secretly in the privacy of his own thoughts described as the best sound in the house. He knew who he was. Bruce had kept that promise, all of it, when the time was right. When Harry was 6, Bruce had sat him down in the study and told him everything. His parents, Halloween 1981. What had happened and why, Voldemort, the prophecy, Dumbledore, the doorstep. Harry had listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which Bruce had been prepared for, and then had said, "So I was supposed to grow up not knowing any of this, and then go to school and fight a dark wizard who couldn't kill me when I was a baby." And Bruce had said, "Yes," and Harry had said, "That's a terrible plan," and Bruce had said, "I know," and Harry had said, "Okay, what's our plan?" That was Harry at 6. By 11, the plan had been revised many times. It had subheadings now. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday in July. Harry was in the kitchen helping Alfred make breakfast, helping in the liberal sense that meant he was sitting on the counter eating toast and theoretically available for tasks while actually reading a book about advanced transfiguration theory, when Alfred opened the back door for air and a tawny owl sailed in, dropped a letter on the counter next to Harry's toast, and sailed back out. Harry picked up the letter. He looked at it. The address read, Mr. H. Potter, the kitchen counter, Wayne Manor, Gotham City, New Jersey. Well, Harry said, that's embarrassingly accurate. Alfred looked at it. How did it know the kitchen counter specifically? Magical tracking, Harry said, already opening it. Probably calibrated to my magical signature rather than a fixed address, which is why here, look. He held up the letter. Bruce had found early on that one of the best approaches to Harry was to never pretend anything was normal when it wasn't. And one of the things Harry had absorbed from this was the habit of treating extraordinary things with practical interest rather than alarm. Hogwarts letter. He held it out. Alfred read it with the expression he reserved for things that were significant and deserved proper attention. Today was always going to come, Alfred said. I know. Harry hopped off the counter, still chewing his toast, and went to the doorway. Bruce, he shouted in the direction of the cave stairs. The Hogwarts letter's here. A pause, then the sound of footsteps on the stairs, quick and deliberate. Bruce appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his workout clothes, coffee in hand, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He took the letter from Harry and read it. His expression gave very little away, which was normal, except that the hand holding the coffee lowered incrementally, which was the tell. It's real, Harry said. He was watching Bruce the way he always watched Bruce in moments like this, because Bruce's tells were where the truth lived. You knew it was coming. I knew it was coming. And, Bruce looked at him, and we need to talk about it. We've been talking about it for 4 years. We need to finish talking about it. Harry leaned against the counter and crossed his arms and looked at Bruce with patient, green-eyed attention. Outside, a car drove past. The kitchen smelled of coffee and Alfred's excellent bread. It was an ordinary morning in a manner that had become home through the accretion of exactly these moments. Ordinary mornings, small negotiations, the 1,000 mundane exchanges that constitute a life lived together. I want to go, Harry said. I know. I've always wanted to go. It's where I'll learn the most. The culture, the politics, the Dumbledore is going to be there, and we need to know what he's working toward. We need to be on the inside. A pause. And I want to learn magic from people who have done nothing else their whole lives. No offense to Zatanna. None taken, Zatanna said from the doorway. She'd arrived 20 minutes ago for what was supposed to be a routine training session. She had clearly been listening. She walked in and sat down at the kitchen table with the ease of someone who had eaten here many times. He's right on all counts. I've given him what I can. He's passed me in some areas already, which I'm choosing to experience as a personal triumph rather than a professional humiliation. Bruce looked at her. What? She said. He can outcast me on precision spellwork in half the elemental forms. He's 11, it's fine, I'm fine. I can't outcast you on backward verbal magic, Harry offered. That's mine, you don't get that. Yet, Harry said. Not yet, no, Zatanna agreed, with the tone of someone who was actually not entirely sure about that. Bruce set down his coffee. He looked at the letter. He looked at Harry. There was a long pause in which Harry knew Bruce was running through the full strategic picture, not because he was reluctant, but because that was simply how Bruce operated, and Harry had learned years ago that this was not the same as hesitation. We have conditions, Bruce said. We, Harry said. Alfred Clark Zatanna and I have discussed this. You had a meeting about my Hogwarts letter before I got my Hogwarts letter. We've been prepared for this for 3 years. Yes, Harry stared at him. That's okay, you know what, that's completely on brand for you. What are the conditions? Not conditions, Alfred said from the stove where he had quietly resumed cooking during the strategy session. Understandings. What are the understandings? You are not hiding who you are, Bruce said. Not your name, not your abilities, not where you've been raised or how. You walk in there as yourself. I was already planning to do that. Dumbledore will try to manage you. He'll have ideas about who you should be and what role you should play. You don't perform for him, obviously. If at any point the situation becomes genuinely dangerous, not challenging, not difficult, dangerous, you call it in and we respond. No heroics alone. Harry opened his mouth. Harry, he closed it. Fine, but my judgment on the threshold. Your judgment on the threshold, Bruce agreed, which Harry knew meant Bruce reserved the right to violently disagree with his judgment on the threshold after the fact. This was fine. It was the standard operating procedure. Clark wants you to visit the farm before term starts, Alfred said. He has something for you. What? He didn't say. He had the expression he gets when he's being significant about something. Harry grinned. It was the full grin, the one that had over the years caused Alfred to hide his smile behind the nearest convenient object on more than one occasion, because it was a purely undisguised thing, that grin, open and warm and entirely unguarded. I love it when Clark's being significant. He goes all. He stood up straighter and looked into the middle distance with exaggerated nobility. Remarkably accurate, Alfred said. He set a plate in front of the empty chair at the table, which was Harry's signal to sit down and eat like a person. Harry sat down. Will you be replying to the letter today? Yeah, Harry picked up his fork. Tell them yes and that I'll need directions to Diagon Alley for supplies. He glanced up at Bruce. You're coming, obviously, and try not to look like, Harry gestured at him generally. Like what? Like you're casing a target. I don't, Bruce, Harry said, with the affectionate patience of someone who had spent 10 years watching this man assess every room he entered. You absolutely do. The farm smelled like summer, cut grass and something baking, and the specific warm earth smell of Kansas in July that Harry associated with the particular feeling of being completely at ease. He dropped his bag in his room, yellow curtains, still yellow. Martha had kept them exactly and went to find Clark. Clark was in the barn. He was fixing the tractor, technically, but he was doing it very slowly, which meant he was actually thinking about something, and the tractor was the excuse. Alfred said you had something for me, Harry said, dropping onto a hay bale. Clark looked up. He had grease on his hands and his glasses slightly crooked. He looked as he always did in Smallville, like the Clark Kent who had grown up here rather than the Clark Kent who filed copy for the Daily Planet or the Clark Kent who flew at Mach speed over the Atlantic. He looked like someone who had put down every weight he carried and just existed in a place that knew him before any of it. Yeah, Clark said. He set down the wrench and wiped his hands. He sat down on the tractor step and looked at Harry with that steady, warm attention. How are you feeling about all of it? Hogwarts, all of it, the magical world, meeting people who knew your parents, meeting Dumbledore. Harry thought about it honestly. Curious, he said. About most of it, a pause, wary about Dumbledore. Smart, not afraid of him though. I know, Clark said. That's the part I think he's going to find disorienting. Harry smiled. Good. Clark reached behind him into the tractor toolbox, which was, Harry had noticed years ago, occasionally used to store things that had nothing to do with tractors, and produced a small, flat package wrapped in brown paper. He held it out. Harry took it. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a photograph in a simple wooden frame. Two people Harry had never seen in motion, but had seen in photographs a dozen times. His mother, red-haired, green-eyed, laughing at something outside the frame. His father, dark-haired, glasses, one arm around her shoulders with the comfortable ease of someone who does it without thinking. They were young, they were happy. This particular photograph Harry hadn't seen before, not the Christmas portrait that Bruce kept in the study, not the formal order photograph that Zatanna had sourced from her own contacts. This one was candid, taken somewhere outside, and they were both mid-laugh at the same thing. Where did you get this? Harry said. Remus Lupin, Clark said. He was your father's friend at school. He wanted you to know he existed when you were ready. I've been in contact with him for a few years. He gave me this. Harry looked at the photograph for a while. His parents moved, his mother covering her mouth with one hand mid-laugh, his father shaking his head, and they were alive in it, really alive, the way photographs in the magical world managed to be. He'll be at Hogwarts, Clark said. Lupin, he's been hired as the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor for this year. You arranged that. I may have facilitated a recommendation. Harry looked up. Clark, I wanted someone there who I trusted. Who knew your parents, who knows who you are and isn't going to try to manage you. Clark paused. Also, he's genuinely one of the best defense practitioners alive, so the students are going to have a great year. Harry looked back at the photograph. His mother was looking toward something, not the camera, but something just to the left of it, and there was an expression on her face, fond and sharp simultaneously, that Harry had no name for but recognized somewhere wordlessly. Is he okay? Harry asked. Lupin. He manages, Clark said, with the careful phrasing of someone who knows the full story and respects that it isn't only theirs to tell. He's had a hard decade. He'll be all right. Harry nodded. He held the photograph carefully, the way you hold something you know you'll keep. I wanted you to have that before you went, Clark said. So you walked in there with them, not as a story, as people. Harry didn't say anything for a moment. Outside the barn, the Kansas summer went on, warm and golden and completely indifferent to magical worlds and prophecies and 10 years of careful preparation for a single September 1st. Thank you, Harry said, quietly, fully meaning it. You're going to be great, Clark said, not because of your magic. Not because of what happened when you were a baby, because of who you are, a beat. But also the magic is pretty extraordinary, so that doesn't hurt. Harry laughed. It was the loud, sudden, uncontrolled one. It filled the barn and went out through the open door into the summer afternoon, and Clark grinned at the sound of it, and the tractor waited patiently for someone to remember it existed. 2 days before term started, a second owl arrived. Harry was at the desk in his room at Wayne Manor, finishing a letter to the Hogwarts groundskeeper, a man named Hagrid who apparently handled first-year logistics and who, Bruce's files indicated, had been the one to carry Harry from the ruins of Godric's Hollow to the doorstep that Dumbledore had then chosen. Harry had wanted to write to him. It seemed like the right thing to do. The new owl was different from the first. This one was silver-gray, elegant, with the posture of something that had been trained by someone who cared a great deal about appearances. The letter it dropped on his desk had a seal he recognized from Bruce's files, a snake in a crest. Slithering green, he opened it. Mr. Potter, my name is Draco Malfoy. My father has informed me that you will be attending Hogwarts this year. I understand you've been living among muggles for the duration of your absence from our world, which must have been quite limiting. I thought it proper to introduce myself beforehand, as your re-entry into wizarding society will no doubt require guidance. I am offering this as a courtesy. I look forward to meeting you on the train. D. Malfoy. Harry read it twice. Then he read it again, making sure he had the tone right. He put it down. He picked up his quill. He wrote back, Malfoy, thanks for the letter. I have a few questions about the guidance you're offering, mainly. Guidance toward what specifically? I'm also curious what quite limiting means in context, given that the people I've been raised by have between them stopped 6 extinction-level events, but I'm open to a different definition. Looking forward to the train. H. Potter. He sent it. He went back to writing to Hagrid. Bruce appeared in his doorway 20 minutes later. Did you just send a letter to a Malfoy? He wrote first. What did he say? He offered to guide me through wizarding society. Bruce looked at him for a moment. What did you write back? I asked for clarification on the guidance parameters. A pause. Show me. Harry handed it over. Bruce read it. Something at the corner of his mouth moved in a direction that wasn't quite a smile but was the structural precursor to one. He's going to show this to his father, Bruce said. Good, Harry said. I want Lucius Malfoy to know from day one that I'm not what he's expecting. Bruce handed the letter back. He stood there for a moment, looking at his son, not the word either of them had ever used, not once in 10 years, not because it wasn't true, but because it was so true it had never needed saying. With that look he sometimes got, a kind of stock-taking, like he was making sure everything was still there and still real. Term starts in 2 days, Bruce said. I know, you have everything you need. I know. Alfred packed your trunk. Don't reorganize it, he has a system. Alfred's system involves folding my socks in a way that I genuinely believe is encoded with a message I'm not smart enough to decrypt. Don't tell him that. He'll make it harder. Harry grinned. Bruce did something he did rarely in front of people other than Alfred. He reached out and put a hand on Harry's shoulder, briefly, the way you do when words have reached their limit and you want the contact to carry the rest. You're ready, Bruce said. I know I am, Harry said. I know you know. He let go. That's not why I said it. Harry understood. He nodded. Bruce left. Harry turned back to his desk, to the letter he was writing Hagrid, to the photograph of his parents in its wooden frame propped against the lamp, to the wand on the corner of his desk that had made every object in a New Orleans shop rise 6 inches on its first wave. Outside Wayne Manor, Gotham went about its complicated, relentless business. Inside, the manor was warm and lit and full of the small sounds of people who belonged to each other going about the evening. Harry finished his letter to Hagrid. He sealed it. He looked at his parents in the photograph, his mother laughing at something wonderful, his father's arm easy around her shoulders, both of them alive and full of something he would spend a long time learning to name. I'm going, he told them. They didn't hear him, but he said it anyway. In Hogwarts, in the circular office at the top of the astronomy tower, Albus Dumbledore sat at his desk. The instruments spun. The one calibrated to Harry Potter pulsed steadily, reassuringly, exactly as it had for 10 years. He was revising the curriculum for the coming year. He had arranged for the defense position to go to a man named Quirinus Quirrell, who had returned from a year of travel abroad looking rather more gaunt than he'd left and rather more eager to be useful. Dumbledore found him somewhat changed, but useful was useful. He did not yet know that a different appointment had been made. He did not yet know a great many things. He looked at the instrument, pulsing, steady. Somewhere in Surrey, a boy was preparing for his first year at Hogwarts, a boy who had grown up in small rooms and smaller expectations, who would arrive on platform 9 3/4 grateful and bewildered and entirely ready to be guided. That was the plan. It was a good plan. He turned back to his papers. On platform 9 3/4, the Scarlet Engine waited. Chapter 3, The Scarlet Engine and the Boy Who Arrived King's Cross Station on the 1st of September smelled like diesel and departure. Harry had been here twice before, once with Zatanna when he was 8, walking the mundane corridors purely so he'd know the layout, and once with Bruce 6 months ago for the same reason Bruce did everything twice, to make sure the first time had been correct. He knew where the barrier was. He knew how it felt to walk through it, the brief vertigo of one world giving way to another, like stepping through a waterfall into a cave behind it. He pushed his trolley through the barrier alone. Bruce was behind him. Alfred had said his goodbyes at the manor that morning with characteristic precision, packed trunk, pressed clothes, a handshake that lasted 3 seconds longer than a handshake, which was Alfred's equivalent of a sustained emotional declaration. Clark had called from Metropolis at 7, and the call had lasted 45 minutes and covered everything from the political structure of the wizarding world to the specific sandwiches Alfred had packed for the train, and had ended with Clark saying, "I'm proud of you," which Harry had absorbed quietly and carried with him through the morning. The platform hit him immediately. It wasn't the Scarlet Engine, though the engine was extraordinary, massive and gleaming and absolutely confident in its own anachronism. It wasn't the crowd, though the crowd was dense and bright and full of movement, owls in cages and cats in baskets and children in robes dragging trunks nearly as big as themselves. It wasn't even the smell of it, that specific mixture of steam and something sweeter underneath, like the air around Zatanna's apartment when she'd been working for hours. It was the magic of it. Harry had grown up with magic. He'd felt it in Zatanna's apartment, in the New Orleans wand shop, in his own hands for years, but this was different. This was a place that had been soaked in it for centuries, every person and object an inch of air, carrying the accumulated residue of generation after generation of magical people doing magical things. It pressed against his senses, the way music presses against you when you walk into a concert hall, not loud, but full. He stood there for about 3 seconds absorbing it. Then he started moving, because standing still on platform 9 3/4 on September 1st was an excellent way to get knocked over by a trolley. Bruce came through the barrier behind him, one hand in the pocket of his jacket, wearing the expression Harry had warned him about. To his credit, he was making an effort. He was almost certainly also memorizing every face he could see. "Don't," Harry said without looking at him. "I'm not doing anything. You're running facial recognition in your head. I'm looking at the platform." "Same thing." Harry maneuvered his trolley through the crowd toward the train. "Go stand somewhere inconspicuous. Actually talk to people if any of them try to talk to you. Don't assess them like targets." "I don't, Bruce." Harry stopped and looked at him directly. "I love you. Please stop looking like you're planning a tactical extraction." Bruce looked at him. Something shifted in his face, the slight unclenching that happened when Harry said things like that, the thing Bruce never quite managed to not react to no matter how many years he'd had to get used to it. "Fine," he said. "Thank you. I'm going to stand over there." "Great. I can see the whole platform from there." "I know you can." Bruce moved. Harry turned back to the train. He loaded his trunk into a compartment near the middle of the train, not the first compartment, because first was obvious, and not the last, because last was too isolated. Middle was right. He stowed his trunk, settled Hedwig's cage on the overhead rack. Hedwig, a snowy owl he'd had for 2 years, who regarded the commotion outside the window with aristocratic disdain, and sat down. He was alone in the compartment for about 4 minutes. The door opened. A boy with red hair and the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone managing a complex logistical situation, his own trunk, a rat in his pocket, and the ambient noise of what appeared to be several loud siblings outside, leaned in. "Is it sorry, are all the other compartments?" "Sit down," Harry said. "There's plenty of room." The boy maneuvered his trunk in with the practiced awkwardness of someone who had done this before but not particularly well. He sat down across from Harry and blew his fringe out of his eyes. He had freckles and an open face and the specific energy of someone who had never successfully pretended to be something they weren't. "Ron Weasley," he said, extending a hand with the slightly formal air of someone who'd been told to introduce themselves properly. "Harry Potter," Harry said, shaking it. Ron's expression went through something rapid and complicated, recognition, recalibration, and then something that settled, interestingly, into straightforward curiosity rather than the awe Harry had been vaguely prepared for. "The Harry Potter, only one I know of." "Blimey," Ron looked at him. "My mum was wondering where you'd been. Actually, everyone was wondering where you'd been. Gotham, mostly." "Gotham," Ron blinked. "In America, New Jersey, technically, with Muggles." "With Bruce Wayne, specifically." Ron stared at him. Bruce Wayne, the billionaire, the one whose, he seemed to be searching his Muggle cultural knowledge, which appeared to be limited. "My dad would know. He's obsessed with Muggles." "Your dad would definitely know," Harry agreed. The compartment door opened again, this time without a preliminary knock. A girl with bushy brown hair, her robes already on and precisely fitted, her expression carrying the brisk efficiency of someone who had already solved 3 problems before 10 in the morning, looked at them from the doorway. "Have either of you seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost his." "No toad," Ron said. "No," Harry said. "Come in if you're looking. You can see the platform from here while you search." She came in. She looked around the compartment thoroughly and quickly, checked under both seats and looked up. "It's not here." "I'll keep checking." She looked at Harry with the direct attention of someone assessing new information. "You're Harry Potter." "Yeah, I'm Hermione Granger. I've read about you." A pause. "The historical accounts mostly, and some theory about the protection magic your mother created. The Hogwarts library has a fairly limited section on living subjects for obvious reasons, but there's a reasonable foundational text in the wider. What's the theory on the protection magic?" Harry said. She stopped. Most people, he'd noticed, expected you to be overwhelmed by the information she was producing. He was interested in it. The adjustment took her half a second. The current theoretical consensus is that love-based magic of that particular intensity created a physical imprint in your blood, a kind of living ward. The interesting question is whether it's still active given that you apparently haven't been living with your aunt. It's still active, Harry said. Zatanna Zatara reworked the binding when I was 14 months old. It's anchored to a personal magical signature now rather than a location. Hermione stared at him. Zatanna Zatara. The Zatanna Zatara. She's been my magic teacher for about 9 years. Several things crossed Hermione Granger's face in quick succession, and Harry watched all of them with interest, surprise, recalculation. A kind of hunger that wasn't envy exactly, more like recognition of someone who had access to something she desperately wanted access to herself. Then, settling over all of it, decision. She sat down. I have a lot of questions, she said. Ask them, Harry said. Ron looked between the two of them with the expression of someone who had arrived at a chess match expecting checkers. Should I stay? Harry said. You probably have questions too. I mostly have questions about your Muggle guardian being a billionaire. Yeah, we'll get to that. The train moved. The platform fell away. England unfurled outside the windows. First London's dense geometry, then suburbs, then the clean open space of the countryside rolling northward toward Scotland. Inside the compartment, 3 children who had never met before yesterday morning negotiated the specific, rapid intimacy of people discovering they find each other genuinely interesting. Hermione wanted to know everything. She asked with the focused velocity of someone who had been building questions for years and had finally found a person who might have the answers. How did Zatanna's approach to spellwork differ from traditional wand methodology? Had Harry studied wandless magic, she'd read 3 papers on it, and the theory was extraordinary. What did he know about the relationship between magical intent and verbal incantation structure? Had he done any reading on the Hogwarts founder's original curriculum? Harry answered everything she asked and asked his own questions back, and by the time the countryside had fully replaced the city, they were in the middle of a conversation about magical theory that Ron was following with the carefully maintained attention of someone who was less interested in the specifics, but was absolutely not going to be left out. Right, Ron said, at a pause. I don't know what half of that means. But I know about Quidditch, if that helps. Harry laughed. Hermione looked at Ron with the expression she apparently wore when she was deciding whether to be impatient and landed instead on fond, which Harry suspected was a choice she made about Ron specifically. Tell me about Quidditch, Harry said. Ron lit up. He was, Harry realized, one of those people who become more themselves when they're talking about something they love, the self-consciousness dropping away, the voice getting faster, the hands starting to move. He knew Quidditch the way Harry knew tactical frameworks, not just the rules but the history, the players, the specific genius of certain formations, the way the game had evolved over the last century in response to changes in broom technology. Do you play? Ron asked. I've ridden Clarks, I've ridden brooms a few times, never played properly. You'll be good, Ron said, with the confident generosity of someone who likes people and assumes the best of them by default. You've got the build for a seeker, actually. What's a seeker? The explanation carried them through the rest of England. The compartment door opened once more, around midday, and this time it was not someone looking for a toad. It was a blond boy with an angular face and the practiced carriage of someone who had been taught since birth that posture was a form of communication, flanked by 2 much larger boys who served the architectural function of emphasis. Draco Malfoy looked at Harry with the expression of someone who had rehearsed this meeting and was finding the reality of it already slightly different from the rehearsal. Potter, he said. Malfoy, Harry said. How's the guidance framework coming? A pause. Malfoy's expression recalibrated. He'd clearly expected something, nervousness, perhaps, or the reflexive deference that his name usually produced. I wanted to introduce myself properly. You already wrote. Sit down if you want to talk, otherwise the aisle's behind you. The 2 large boys looked at each other. Malfoy looked at Harry with the specific focus of someone who is genuinely trying to determine whether they're being insulted or simply addressed as an equal, which in his experience were the same thing. He sat down. He looked at Ron with the naked disdain of someone who has absorbed their parents' opinions wholesale and hasn't yet developed the framework to question them. Weasley, he said, the name carrying a weight of social judgment that Ron received with the ease of someone who'd heard it in that tone before and had decided it said more about the speaker than the subject. Malfoy, Ron said flatly. And you're Granger, Malfoy said to Hermione. You're Muggle-born. And you're observant, Hermione said. Well done. Something moved across Malfoy's face, not quite a smile, but the structural ancestor of one. He looked back at Harry. You're not what I expected, he said, with the candor of someone whose pride is competing with his curiosity and losing. What were you expecting? Someone more, I don't know. You've been with Muggles for 10 years. I expected someone smaller, Harry suggested. Malfoy's mouth pressed together. Someone less comfortable. With what? With everything. He gestured at the compartment, the train, the world, Hogwarts ahead of them. This is your first time in our world properly. Most people in your position would be. I've been in your world for years, Harry said. I trained with Zatanna Zatara. I've met Dumbledore's counterparts in the American magical tradition and several European ones. I know the history of the British magical community back to the Statute of Secrecy. A pause. My position isn't what you think it is. Malfoy was quiet for a moment. He was reassessing. Harry could see it happening, the framework he'd arrived with proving insufficient, the careful, redrawn lines. This was, Harry had learned from Bruce, the most interesting moment with anyone when they were deciding whether to dig in or adapt. Your letter was rude, Malfoy said. Your letter was presumptuous. I was offering guidance, Harry said. I know. What I'm telling you is that I don't need the specific kind of guidance you were offering, which is guidance toward your family's idea of how I should behave. He said it without heat, not as an attack, just as information, the way Bruce stated tactical realities. I'm open to actually knowing you, if that's something you're interested in, but it'd have to be on the basis that I'm not performing anything for anyone. Malfoy stared at him. Ron was watching Malfoy with the expression of someone expecting a hostile reaction and prepared to engage with it. Hermione was watching Harry with the expression of someone who has just updated a significant data point. Fine, Malfoy said. He stood up. I'll see you at the sorting. Looking forward to it, Harry said. Malfoy left, his two bookends followed. The compartment door slid shut. That was mental, Ron said. He's interesting, Harry said. He's a prat. He's a prat who adjusted, Harry said. People who can adjust are interesting. Ron thought about this. He was still a prat about Hermione. Yes, Harry agreed. We'll work on that. You think there's something to work on, Hermione said. She was looking at Harry with that steady, evaluating attention again. I think he's been handed a whole set of opinions he hasn't interrogated yet and doesn't have the right friction in his life to question them. Put him around people who don't confirm them and see what happens. Harry shrugged, could be wrong. You do that a lot, Hermione said. Look at people and think about what made them. Bruce does it. I picked it up. Who's Bruce? Ron asked. My guardian. The billionaire, the billionaire. Ron nodded slowly, piecing things together. So when you said you've ridden brooms before, have you ever ridden one while, like, doing something specifically impressive that you're being modest about right now? Harry looked at him. Clark took me up to about 40,000 feet once. Clark Kent. Ron's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Clark Kent, Superman Clark Kent. He prefers Clark. Right, Ron said, with the specific tone of someone filing this under things they are going to need time to fully process. Right, okay, cool, fine. The boats across the Black Lake were someone's idea of poetry, and Harry appreciated them for it. The castle rising from the dark hillside, lit from within, towers and ramparts, and the absolute self-possessed immensity of a place that had been standing for 1,000 years and intended to stand for 1,000 more. It pressed against Harry's chest in a way that was nothing like the train platform and everything like arriving somewhere you didn't know you'd been heading. Hermione breathed in sharply beside him. It's real, she said very quietly. Yeah, Harry said. Ron was looking up at it with the expression of someone for whom this is both new and deeply familiar. His brothers had all been here. His parents had been here. The castle existed in his life as story and legend, and now it was stone and water and light, enormous and true. Their boat reached the bank. They climbed out, soaking their shoes in the shallows, and followed the enormous figure of Hagrid up the slope toward the entrance. Harry had not yet spoken to Hagrid directly. He'd exchanged letters, 3 of them, over the summer, and Hagrid had written back each time with the specific warmth of someone who was being careful not to say too much, but couldn't quite help saying something. Letters full of exclamation marks and misspellings, and occasional references to your mum and dad that Harry had reread several times. Now he looked at Hagrid from behind in the dark, at the enormous shoulders and the careful way he moved to make sure none of the first years fell behind, and thought, this man carried me out of the ruins. At the top of the slope, Hagrid turned to count heads. His eyes swept the group and then stopped, with the sudden stillness of a large animal that has heard something important. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. Harry, Hagrid said. His voice was rough and quiet. There were people all around them, first years in wet shoes, an enormous castle ahead, a night full of ceremony, and none of it was the right context for this. Neither of them pretended it was. "Hi, Hagrid," Harry said. Hagrid's face did something large and honest and completely uncontrolled. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then he simply said, "Yeah, look like your dad. Same hair, same way of standin'. I've heard that. Ye have got your mum's eyes, though." "The green ones," he swallowed. "I am real glad ye are here, Harry, real glad." "Me too," Harry said. They looked at each other for a moment in the dark outside the castle. Then Hagrid cleared his throat, turned back to the group, and resumed the count, and the night moved on. Ron, at Harry's shoulder, said nothing. He just walked beside him through the entrance. The Great Hall made Harry understand, for the first time, why people cried at things that weren't sad. He wasn't going to cry. But he understood the mechanism, the accumulated beauty of 1,000 candles floating above 4 long tables, the ceiling open to the night sky, the sound of 400 voices going suddenly quiet as the first years filed in, the impossible, gorgeous impracticality of a room designed not for efficiency, but for wonder. He walked in with his chin up and his hands easy at his sides, and he felt the ripple go through the room when someone at one of the tables said his name, not loudly, just a word at normal volume in a newly silent space, and then it went from table to table in whispers like a wave finding a shore. Harry Potter. He kept walking. He didn't perform surprise at the attention or false modesty about it. He'd known this was coming. He took his place in the loose cluster of first years and looked around at the room the way he looked at any new environment, noting the exits, the layout, the positions of authority, the faces he'd read about in Bruce's files, and then he let himself simply be there, in the room, in the moment. At the staff table, he found the face he was looking for. Remus Lupin looked older than the photographs Clark had shown him. Not badly older, just worn, in the way of someone who has carried something heavy for a long time and has gotten very good at carrying it. He had light brown hair going gray early and eyes that were, even from this distance, warm in the way Harry associated with people who had survived grief and come out the other side of it still open. He was looking at the first years. When his eyes found Harry, they stopped. Harry gave him a small nod. Lupin's expression moved like weather, recognition, old pain, and then something that resolved into something quieter and more lasting. He nodded back. At the far end of the staff table, Albus Dumbledore sat with his hands folded and his half-moon spectacles gleaming in the candlelight. Harry looked at him. He was exactly as described, the long silver beard, the magnificent robes, the benevolent gravity that radiated from him the way warmth radiates from a fire, genuine and real, and also from the right angle, serving a particular function. Dumbledore was looking at the first years with the patient attention of a man waiting to see something he's arranged. His eyes found Harry. Something happened in them, brief, quickly controlled. An adjustment, a recalibration, something between there you are and that's unexpected. It was gone in a second, smoothed over by the consummate control of a man who had run the most powerful magical institution in Britain for 50 years and knew how to keep his face. Harry looked at him for exactly 1 second longer than was necessary, just long enough to let him know it was intentional. Then he looked away. The sorting hat was placed on Harry's head and said within 2 seconds, in a voice only he could hear, "Well, you're the most interesting first year I've had in 40 years. Thank you, Harry thought back. Plenty of courage, no more than that. Valor with precision, considerable cleverness. A mind that cuts and bends both, which is rarer than people think. And loyalty which in you is not a passive quality but a chosen one. You've decided who your people are and nothing short of evidence will change it." A pause. "The thing is with you, the houses are all describing the same person. The qualities aren't distributed, they're all present fully simultaneously. That almost never happens. So what do you do with that? What do you want?" Harry thought about it honestly. Not what would be strategic, not what would be expected, not what the prophecy or Dumbledore's plan or anyone else's narrative wanted from him. What he wanted. "I want to be somewhere I can build something," he thought, "not just prove something." That, the hat said with something that might have been satisfaction, is the most Gryffindor answer available, even if you could thrive anywhere. "Then put me there," Harry said. "Gryffindor," the hat shouted to the hall. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry walked to it, sat down, and Ron arrived 30 seconds later, landing next to him with the grin of someone who'd been hoping for this, and Hermione after that, and the night became something celebratory and warm. From the staff table, Dumbledore watched Harry walk to Gryffindor and smiled. The smile of a man seeing a plan go right, which it was, and also the smile of a man who had not noticed that the plan had already developed several critical variables he hadn't accounted for. Across the hall, at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was sorted quickly, predictably, and watched Harry across the room for a long time with an expression no one, but someone paying careful attention, would have identified as the early stages of something he didn't have a name for yet. After the feast, the first years followed the prefects toward Gryffindor Tower. Harry walked with Ron and Hermione, listening to Percy Weasley, Ron's eldest present brother, head prefect Energy, deeply earnest, explain the rules of the corridor. He noted the layout, the moving staircases, the portraits that watched, the particular quality of the castle's magic, denser and older than anything he'd felt before, woven into the stone itself. On the way up the second staircase, a figure fell into step beside him. Mr. Potter. Remus Lupin's voice was quiet enough that only Harry heard it. I teach defense against the dark arts. I wanted to introduce myself properly rather than leaving it to circumstance. Professor Lupin, Harry said. Clark said to tell you hello. A pause. How is he? Good. He says you owe him a phone call. He's right, I'm bad at phones. A brief pause. You look like James. I know, and I have my mum's eyes. You do. Something in Lupin's voice was careful and full at the same time, a man holding something that has weight. He would have liked knowing you were being raised by someone who takes everything seriously. James always said the worst thing you could do for someone you loved was pretend anything was easy. Harry was quiet for a moment. They were on the stairs, and around them first years chattered and pointed at moving portraits, and the castle lived and breathed its old magic. What was she like? Harry said. My mum. Specifically, Lupin considered it the way people consider things they actually mean. She was the kind of person who walked into a room and made everyone in it feel like the interesting thing they'd been waiting for had just arrived. Not because she was performing anything, because she genuinely found everyone interesting. He paused. You may have inherited that. I make people feel interesting. You make people feel like you're actually looking at them. Yes, Harry thought about that. They reached the landing, and the main group of first years was pulling ahead, and Lupin would need to go back down. Office hours are Tuesdays and Thursdays, Lupin said. My door is always open to students who want to talk, about defense or anything else. I'll come Tuesday, Harry said. Lupin nodded. He paused just for a moment, looking at Harry with that old warm, weather-worn expression. I'm very glad you're here, he said. Your parents would be, they would be very proud, but more than that, they would just be glad to know you. He turned and went back down the stairs. Harry stood there for a moment on the landing. Through a window beside the staircase, Scotland spread out in darkness, the lake silver-black below. His first night in the castle, his parents had walked these corridors. He could feel them here somehow, not as ghosts, but as presence, the way a room still holds the warmth of a fire long after the fire's out. You all right? Ron said, appearing at his shoulder. Yeah, Harry said. Really, yeah, actually. Ron looked at him for a moment, then at the dark window, then back. He nodded in the way people nod when they understand something they weren't told. Come on, he said. Percy's going to combust if we fall too far behind. Harry turned from the window. He followed Ron up the stairs, into the warm corridors of Gryffindor Tower, toward a dormitory where his trunk waited with Alfred's precisely folded contents, and Hedwig would arrive at the window any moment now, and tomorrow the education he'd been building toward for 10 years would actually begin. Behind him, below in the great hall, the candles burned on. In the headmaster's office at the top of the tower, Albus Dumbledore sat very still, looking at his instruments. They still said everything was fine. They still said the signals were consistent, and the plan was on course. But the image of Harry Potter walking into the great hall and looking at him, that brief, deliberate, knowing look, sat in his mind like a question he hadn't written. He tented his fingers. He thought. He began very quietly to revise. Chapter 4. The man in the turban. The thing about Hogwarts was that it had a rhythm. Harry discovered this within the first 2 weeks. The castle moved through its days with the unhurried confidence of something that had been doing this for 1,000 years and expected to be doing it for 1,000 more. Breakfast at the long tables, with the morning owls arriving in organized chaos. Classes in rooms that had moods of their own, transfiguration precise and demanding, charms warm and forgiving, potions cold and exacting in a way that had less to do with the subject and everything to do with the man teaching it. Severus Snape was the first genuinely interesting problem Harry encountered at Hogwarts. Not a problem in the sense of an obstacle. A problem in the sense that Bruce used the word, something with layers that didn't resolve on first examination. Snape looked at Harry on the first day of potions with an expression that was simultaneously hostile and something much more complicated underneath it, and Harry had sat through the famous opening interrogation. Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? And had answered correctly, and had watched something flicker behind Snape's eyes that wasn't the satisfied contempt he'd been performing. After class, when everyone else had left, Harry had stayed. Snape looked at him from behind his desk, with the expression of a man who had expected this, and had 3 different responses prepared and wasn't sure which one to use. "You knew my mother," Harry said, not an accusation, just a fact he'd placed on the table. A long pause. "Yes, Lupin told me she was remarkable." Lupin, Snape said, the name carrying a texture that Harry filed carefully, has a tendency toward understatement. "She was your friend." Another pause, longer this time, with more going on inside it. "We were children together," Snape said, which was technically an answer and contained almost none of the answer. "Is there a point to this visit, Potter?" "I wanted you to know that I know," Harry said, "about her, that you were close. I'm not going to pretend I know the whole story because I don't, but I didn't want you to think I was just a name to you without knowing that she's not just a name to me." He paused. "And I also wanted to say I think potions is the most interesting class I've had so far." Snape looked at him for a long time. "That will be all, Potter." Harry left. In the corridor outside, Ron was waiting. "What was that about?" Ron said. "I'll tell you later." He didn't take points. Ron stared at him. He took 5 points from Neville for breathing too loudly near a cauldron. "I know," Harry said. "It's interesting, isn't it?" The first Quidditch practice happened on a Thursday, and Harry discovered that Ron had been right. He was a natural seeker. He'd always been good on a broom. The handful of times he'd had access to one had demonstrated that, but this was different. This was a school broom, old and slightly unsteady, and it still responded to him like an extension of thought rather than an instrument he was operating. He hit 60 feet in 12 seconds, and the world went quiet the way it did when he was really, truly in the right place. And below him, the pitch spread out in its clean geometry, and he could see everything. Oliver Wood, the Gryffindor Quidditch captain, watched him from below, mouth slightly open. "Right," Oliver said when Harry came back down. "Right, okay, you're starting seeker." "I thought you already had one," Harry said. "I have a 3rd year with decent instincts and a tendency to close his eyes. He'll understand." Oliver said this with the ruthless optimism of someone who has decided the ends justify the means and is prepared to feel bad about it later. "How long have you been flying?" "A few years." "Never played structured Quidditch." "Natural talent," Oliver said, in the reverent tone of a man who has just discovered religion. "Absolute natural talent. We're going to win the cup." Harry grinned. Ron, watching from the sidelines, said to Hermione, "Told you. You said he had the build for it," Hermione said without looking up from Hogwarts, a history. "You didn't specify competence." "Implied." "Nothing was implied. You were guessing." "Informed guessing." "That's not." She looked up, watched Harry bank hard left at full speed and pull up 3 feet from the ground with the casual control of someone who'd done this 100 times. She revised her expression. "Okay, fine." "That's impressive." The defense against the dark arts classroom smelled like old wood and something herbal, and Remus Lupin taught the subject the way he apparently did everything, with the unhurried intensity of someone who considered it genuinely important and wanted you to feel that. He was extraordinary at it. Harry had known this was coming. Clark had told him, but knowing and watching were different things. Lupin's class moved differently from every other class. He didn't have them copying notes. He didn't have them reciting theory in abstract. He put them in situations and had them think their way through, and when someone made a mistake, he didn't make them feel stupid about it. He made them feel like they'd found a useful data point. The first time a boggart appeared in class was also the first time Harry became aware that he was operating on a different level from most of his classmates, and that this was going to require some management, not hiding. He'd promised Bruce, and more importantly, he'd promised himself. But management in the sense of not making everyone around him feel incompetent, which served no one. The boggart went through the class. Neville's became Snape. Lavender's became something small and scuttling. Ron's became a spider, and he handled it with wobbly but genuine effort. Hermione's became Professor McGonagall telling her she'd failed everything, which Harry filed as important information about Hermione without making her aware he'd filed it. When it came to Harry, the boggart turned toward him and paused. The class paused too, waiting. Boggarts became your deepest fear. In theory. The mechanism was real. Harry had read the theory, had discussed it with Zatanna, understood the psychological underpinning. What it required was a fear that lived in you as specific image, a concrete thing your mind had already constructed as the shape of what you dreaded most. The boggart looked at Harry and couldn't find one, not because Harry had no fears. He had them, the specific, chosen fears of someone who thinks carefully about what matters, but his fears didn't live as images. They lived as abstractions, failing the people I love, being used as a tool by someone who's decided what I'm for, losing them before I've said enough. The boggart circled through his surface-level thoughts, looking for a shape, and found nothing solid to hold on to. It settled uncertainly into a flickering gray form, something neither here nor there, indeterminate, reaching. Harry looked at it with the same level attention he gave everything. "Ridiculous," he said, and the boggart became a gray blob on roller skates that immediately went sideways into the wardrobe, and the class laughed and the moment passed. Afterward, when the class had gone, Harry stayed. Lupin was putting the wardrobe lock back on, moving with practiced efficiency. "The boggart couldn't find a form," Harry said. "I noticed. Is that unusual? In a first year?" Lupin looked at him. "Yes. In someone who spent years training their mind to think in abstractions rather than images, and who has grown up around people who approach fear as a tactical problem to be solved. Not really." Harry sat on one of the desks. "What would it have been for my dad?" Lupin considered it. "James, in first year," a small smile. "Probably losing the Quidditch match. He was still very 17 about some things at 11. The smile shifted into something older and more complicated. "By the end, I think it would have been what it was for all of us, losing the people we were protecting." "What's yours?" A pause. Then Lupin sat on the desk across from him, hands folded, in the position of someone who has decided to answer honestly. "A full moon," he said, which was not a metaphor, and Harry heard it as not a metaphor, and the understanding sat between them plainly, without performance. "Clark told me," Harry said, "before I came. He wanted me to know so I wasn't, so I could just be someone who knows, rather than someone finding out." "That sounds like Clark," Lupin said. "He trusts you. He's kind enough to." Harry looked at his hands. "I'd like to work with you on advanced defense this year, outside of regular class time. Not because I need to catch up, I need to go in the right direction." Lupin looked at him with that specific, warm, clear attention. "What direction is that?" "The direction where I actually understand the magic I'm doing, not just the technique. Zatanna taught me spellwork. I need someone who can teach me combat application, tactics. The kind of defense that's about reading situations, not just responding to them." "Your mother was the same way," Lupin said. "She wanted to understand the why before she'd commit to the how. Drove your father insane. He was always ready to do something before he knew the reason for it. They balanced each other well." He paused. "Tuesdays after dinner, we'll use the classroom, and I'll expect you to tell me what you already know so I'm not wasting your time on things Zatanna's already covered." "Deal," Harry said. He hopped off the desk and picked up his bag. At the door, he stopped. "Professor, I don't know much about what it costs you," Harry said carefully, "the monthly thing. But if there's something I can do, research, or I just mean you don't have to manage it alone if there are options." Lupin was quiet for a long moment. Something moved across his face that Harry thought might be the specific emotion of being seen by someone who doesn't need anything from you. "Thank you, Harry," he said. "I'll let you know." The thing about Quirinus Quirrell was that something was wrong with him. Harry knew it within the first week, and knowing it was irritating not because he couldn't identify it, but because he could identify it clearly, and the identification produced a problem with no immediate clean solution. Quirrell shook. He wore a purple turban he explained away as a gift, and the explanation wobbled in the specific way of a story someone has rehearsed too many times. He had the energy of a man under sustained pressure, not just anxiety, not just the ordinary nervousness of a professor unsure of his standing, but the watchful, calibrated tension of someone who was sharing space with something he was afraid of. Harry had grown up around Bruce Wayne. He knew the difference between fear and shared occupancy. He brought it to Lupin on a Tuesday in October, sitting across from him in the defense classroom with a cup of tea Lupin had insisted on and his thoughts laid out in the careful sequence he'd learned from Bruce. "Something's wrong with Quirrell," Harry said. Lupin set down his own cup. "What have you noticed? He shakes only in specific contexts. Not when he's startled. I tested that. Dropped a book behind him last week and he flinched but didn't shake. He shakes when he's thinking about something. When his attention goes inward." Harry paused. "He smells wrong." Lupin went very still. "I know that sounds odd," Harry said. "No," Lupin said carefully. "It doesn't sound odd to me at all." He was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone choosing how much to say. "What does it smell like, specifically?" "Dead things," Harry said, "and something else I don't have a name for, something cold." Lupin's expression had gone through several careful adjustments that he wasn't quite successfully hiding. "Have you told anyone else this? You're the first." "I went to Hermione with the observable data, the shaking patterns, because she's been running her own informal analysis, and I wanted to see if we were reaching the same conclusions. She thinks he's hiding something. She framed it as behavioral inconsistency." A pause. "She's also the one who told me there's something in the third-floor corridor that the whole school's been told not to go near." Lupin looked at him. I haven't gone, Harry said. Yet, but I've heard the dog. You can hear through 3 floors of stone. I can hear the vibration. It's 3 very large things moving in coordinated rhythm. Dogs walk on 4 legs, 3 dogs approximately very large. The rhythm's too synchronized for them to be separate animals. 1 creature, 3 heads. He met Lupin's eyes. Someone's guarding something. Harry, I'm not going to do anything precipitous, Harry said. I just need you to tell me whether the thing being guarded and Quirrell's wrong smell are the same problem or 2 separate ones. A long pause. Lupin sat forward, turning his teacup in his hands. I'm not in Dumbledore's full confidence on this matter, he said carefully. I know pieces, I suspect the rest. He looked at Harry directly. What I can tell you is that Dumbledore is aware of the threat from Quirrell's direction, or believes he is. I don't know if he's aware of the specific nature of it. The specific nature being what? That's the part I'm not certain of. Harry thought for a moment. Do you know what Voldemort looks like when he's not fully corporeal? Lupin went very still again. Because I've been reading everything Zatanna could find on the dark magic of the last 50 years, Harry said, and there are references, older texts, pre-20th century, to possession as a survival mechanism for a soul that's been significantly fragmented. It requires a host. The host shows specific symptoms. He looked at Quirrell's direction as though he could see through the castle wall. I think Voldemort is in Quirrell's turban. The silence in the classroom was very complete. Harry, Lupin said, and his voice had the quality of something pressing carefully against the edges of a very important moment. You need to write to Bruce. Already drafted the letter. Tonight. Already sent it. Yesterday. Harry picked up his tea. He'll be here by Thursday at the latest, probably Wednesday night. He doesn't like to wait when there's a concrete threat. Lupin stared at him. What? Harry said. You're 11 years old. I'm aware of that. You've been here for 6 weeks. I know. And you've identified a partially corporeal dark wizard living parasitically in the back of your defense against the dark arts professor's head. Harry looked at him steadily. Is that wrong? Lupin exhaled, long and slow. No, he said. No, I don't think it is. He picked up his own tea. I'm going to need you to be careful, Harry. Not cautious careful, there's a difference. Cautious means you stop. Careful means you don't give him any indication that you know. I've been behaving normally in every Quirrell class since I worked it out 3 weeks ago, Harry said. He has no idea. 3 weeks, Lupin repeated. You've been carrying this for 3 weeks. I was still confirming it. Did you tell Ron and Hermione? Ron knows something's wrong. He doesn't know what. Hermione has the behavioral data but not the conclusion. A pause. I'll tell them when Bruce and I have a plan. I don't want to put them in a position where they're trying to hide knowledge from Quirrell before we have a containment strategy. Lupin looked at Harry for a long moment with the expression of a man watching something he wasn't entirely sure how to name. You, he said finally, are extraordinarily like your mother and absolutely nothing like your father and somehow completely both at once. Harry took that as the compliment it was. Bruce arrived on Wednesday. He arrived in the way Bruce always arrived places when it mattered, not through the front door. Harry met him in the grounds at 11 p.m., past curfew, which he handled by leaving the dormitory silently, while Ron slept the deep sleep of someone who'd had Quidditch practice, and coming down through the castle with the specific movement through shadow that Bruce had spent 3 years teaching him, slow and precise and invisible to the portraits which, Bruce had long since theorized tracked movement through peripheral awareness rather than direct attention. The grounds were cold. The lake was a dark mirror. Bruce was crouched at the edge of the forbidden forest, cape down, in civilian clothes that were still somehow precise, looking at the castle with the tactical attention that Harry had finally accepted was simply his natural face when he was working. You look good, Bruce said, standing. You look like you flew commercial, Harry said. I did. How was it? Terrible. He gripped Harry's shoulder briefly, the handshake equivalent that was, between them, its own language. Tell me everything. They walked the perimeter of the grounds and Harry told him everything in the order he'd built it, the same way Bruce had taught him to present information. Observed data first, inference second, conclusion third, question marks flagged clearly throughout. Bruce listened without interrupting, which meant he found it credible. When Bruce had doubts, he interrupted. Quirrell, Bruce said when Harry finished. Turban, the smell's strongest from that direction, and he never takes it off. The stone. Nicholas Flamel's Philosopher's Stone. Hermione found the reference in great wizarding events of the 20th century. She'd checked out half the library by November. She was going to find it eventually. Harry glanced at him. It produces the elixir of life. If Voldemort gets it, he gets a body, Bruce said. Permanent return. He was quiet for a moment. Dumbledore has it here, in the school. There were originally vaults at Gringotts, but it was moved. We think Dumbledore moved it here specifically, the school as the safest location, with the added function of, of drawing Voldemort into a controlled environment, Bruce said, with me here as the variable. He wants you to face him, Bruce said, and it wasn't a question or even an observation so much as a statement of something he'd known for a long time and was simply naming for the first time out loud. He needs you to face him and survive it, or attempt to face him, to build the narrative, the boy who survived it again. I know, and you're not going to perform that for him. I was thinking, Harry said, that I'd face him on my terms. Bruce looked at him. I'm not waiting for Voldemort to make a move and reacting to it, Harry said. That's the story Dumbledore wrote. Boy in danger, boy survives, mystery preserved. I want to go to the stone first, before Quirrell gets there, and be ready. He paused. Not alone. No, Bruce agreed. Not alone. Ron and Hermione need to know. Yes, and Lupin. Yes. Bruce was quiet for a moment, looking at the castle. Harry looked at it with him, the towers, the lit windows, the immense ancient weight of it. There's something else, Harry said. Tell me. Dumbledore's going to find out you're here. I know. When he does, he's going to want to talk to you. I'm looking forward to that conversation, Bruce said, with a particular quietness that Harry recognized as the register Bruce used for things he'd been planning for a very long time. What are you going to say to him? We'll get to that. Bruce looked at him. First the stone, one problem at a time. You hate that rule. I apply it when the other option is making 3 mistakes simultaneously. He paused. The trap in there, the protections around the stone. You've mapped them. 7 layers. Fluffy, the 3-headed dog, is the first. Then there's a devil's snare, a flying keys puzzle, a chess game, a troll, probably already knocked out. They're not subtle, someone will have done that in advance. Then a logic puzzle with potions, and then the final chamber. You've been to the 3rd floor. I've been to the door, Harry said. I could hear the breathing. I counted the heads. Bruce didn't say anything about the door. He filed it as data, which was how Harry knew he'd done the right thing, going as far as information required and no further until there was a plan. The chess game, Bruce said. Human chess. Ron plays at a level that would give you genuine competition. I know, I've played him remotely twice. He thinks he was playing an AI. Harry stared at him. When did you? October. Clark mentioned he was good. I wanted to evaluate. Bruce, what? You're unbelievable. The chess game won't stop us, Bruce said, with the complete equanimity of someone who considers being called unbelievable a mild compliment. The logic puzzle, that's designed to stop pure magical thinking. Someone who approaches it analytically. Hermione will solve it in 4 minutes, Harry said. Probably 3. Good, he thought for a moment. The stone itself, the protection Dumbledore built into it, the mirror. Harry looked at him sharply. How do you know about the mirror? I've been researching Dumbledore's known magical constructs for 9 years, Bruce said. The mirror of Erist. It shows the viewer their deepest desire. He built a protection into it. The stone can only be retrieved by someone who wants to find it but not use it. Harry was quiet for a moment. Can you do that? Bruce asked. Not doubting, evaluating. Stand in front of that mirror and want to find the stone without wanting to use it. I don't want to use it, Harry said simply. I don't want immortality. I want Voldemort not to get it. Those aren't the same thing. I know that. I'm saying my desire is the containment, not the object. Bruce looked at him for a long 3 seconds. Okay, he said. Then you can get it. They moved on Friday night. Harry had told Ron and Hermione on Thursday, sitting in the common room after dinner with the fire going and the room mostly empty, laying it out the same way he'd laid it out for Bruce, data, inference, conclusion, question marks. Ron had gone through the specific progression of a person who doesn't want to believe something and then believes it and then gets angry that he believed it took him that long. Hermione had gone still in the way she went still when she was processing something that disturbed her. He's in Quirrell's head, Ron said. In the turban, we think, the back of his head. That is genuinely the most horrible thing I've ever heard. I know. And the stone is here, in the school, with us. Yes. And Dumbledore put it here. Yes, on purpose. Almost certainly. Ron stared at the fire for a moment. Then, okay, the chess game's mine. Hermione looked at him. Ron. I know this castle better than I know anything, Ron said, which was almost true. He knew Quidditch better, but chess was a close second, and both of them were things he'd grown up with that had become extensions of himself. And Harry needs to be in the final chamber. The chess game needs to be handled so he gets there whole. I'll handle it. There might be, Hermione started. I know what it might mean, Ron said. He looked at Harry. I know. Harry looked at Ron, at the freckled, open face and the steady brown eyes, and the decision that sat in them simply, without dramatics. This was Ron's specific quality. Harry had worked out. He was the person who decided what mattered and then moved toward it without flinching. He didn't need it to be without cost. He just needed it to matter. Thank you, Harry said. Ron nodded. Don't make it weird. Hermione resolved the potion's logic in 3 minutes 40 seconds, which Harry reported to Bruce, and Bruce filed with the satisfaction of a hypothesis confirmed. The final chamber was cold and lit by low purple flame that gave everything the quality of a dream. The mirror of Eris stood against the far wall. Harry had seen it in the descriptions Clark had found. Zatanna had described it. Bruce had analyzed it. None of that prepared him for standing in front of it. It was tall, taller than it needed to be, taller than was practical, built to the proportions of significance rather than use. The frame was ornate and old, and the inscription along the top read backward, Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi. Harry stood in front of it. He looked. In the mirror's surface, he saw his parents. They were standing behind him, his mother's hand on his shoulder, his father's arm around her, the same easy confidence as the photograph in the wooden frame. Behind them were Bruce and Alfred and Clark, and behind them the farm in Smallville under a summer sky, and Lupin and Ron and Hermione and everyone he'd built his life with. They were all looking at him. They all looked, proud wasn't the right word, they looked like they were there, present, choosing to be where he was, and in his right hand his mirror self was holding the stone. He felt it appear in his pocket. He reached in and took it out. It was smaller than he'd imagined. Warm. Red as a coal, faceted like a jewel, sitting in his palm with the quiet self-possession of something that had existed for 600 years and wasn't particularly moved by the drama of the moment. "Impressive," said a voice. Quirrell walked out of the shadow on the other side of the mirror. He wasn't shaking. He'd stopped shaking, the whole careful performance of nervous anxiety gone, and what was left was something that moved with a different quality, smooth and deliberate and cold, like water that looks still until you notice the current. He reached up and unwound his turban. "You knew," said the voice from the back of his head, and it was not Quirrell's voice. It was something older and thinner, with the quality of something that had been stretched very far and still remembered its original shape. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was barely there, white and red-eyed, more impression than feature, a sketch of a face by someone who'd heard faces described but never seen one. A clever boy. I had not expected this. Dumbledore's doing, I assumed, but this is something else. "This is mine," Harry said. "Give me the stone," Voldemort said, "and I will let you live. I will do more than that. I will give you what Dumbledore never would, the truth of what you are. Your power fully realized, not managed and contained for someone else's purposes." "He's right that Dumbledore would manage me," Harry said. "But he's wrong that you're the alternative." He closed his hand around the stone. "You can't touch me. The blood protection," Voldemort said, with a dismissiveness that was almost genuine. "Your mother's, not that," Harry said. "I mean you literally cannot touch me." He looked at Quirrell Voldemort with the level, unafraid attention he'd brought to every hard thing in his life, the same attention he'd brought to a cold doorstep in Surrey that he didn't remember and a wooden photograph frame he carried everywhere, the same attention he'd bring to every hard thing after this. "I'm not afraid of you," Harry said. "I want you to know that before this happens." Voldemort's face, the pale impression of one, studied him. "Why? Because you've been surviving on fear for 50 years. You made yourself a monster so people would fear you instead of seeing what you actually are. A man so terrified of dying he broke himself into pieces." Harry tilted his head slightly. "I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not going to let you use Quirrell." He raised his wand. What happened next was fast. Quirrell lunged, not stumbling, not awkward, but fast in the trained way of a man whose body was being directed by something precise and cold, and Harry moved, not away but sideways, and brought his hand up and pressed it flat against Quirrell's arm. Quirrell screamed. The contact burned. Harry felt it in his hand, a blazing reactive heat, his mother's protection flaring white-hot at the forced proximity to Voldemort's fragmented soul, and where his hand touched Quirrell's skin the man's flesh blistered and crumbled the way old paper burns. Harry pulled back. He hadn't intended that. He hadn't known the protection would do that. Quirrell was on his knees. The face on the back of his head was shrieking, not in pain but in fury, the fury of something that has encountered a force it cannot override through will alone. "Leave him," Harry said sharply, to Voldemort specifically. "Leave him and go. The stone stays with me. Quirrell doesn't die here." "You cannot command me. I just burned you through a human host with my bare hand," Harry said. "You're not corporeal, you have no allies here, and the man who built this school is going to arrive in approximately 4 minutes. He met the red eyes steadily. "Leave him, or I make contact again." A silence. Then something shifted in Quirrell, a departure, a terrible rapid emptying, like air rushing out of a punctured thing, and Quirrell collapsed, barely conscious, onto the stone floor. The face on the back of his head was gone. The chamber filled with a cold that was worse than physical cold, the cold of something ancient and furious, and diminished, moving through the air without a body. Then it was gone. Quirrell was breathing. Harry stood in the center of the chamber with the Philosopher's Stone in his hand and looked at the man on the floor. Quirrell was pale as paper, barely there. Whatever had been holding him together now departed. He was alive. That was what mattered. The door behind Harry burst open. Dumbledore, faster than his age should have allowed, wand already out, the controlled power of him filling the chamber immediately. He took in the scene in 2 seconds. Quirrell on the floor, Harry standing, the stone visible in Harry's hand. His eyes moved to Harry's face. Harry looked back at him. He's alive, Harry said. He needs a healer. Voldemort occupied him, probably since last year when he came back from his sabbatical abroad. The possession's broken. He'll need monitoring. Dumbledore was very still for a long moment. Then he moved to Quirrell, crouching with swift precision, hands moving over the man's form in diagnostic patterns. The stone, he said without looking up. I have it. Will you? I'll give it to you in a minute, Harry said. First I need you to look at me. Dumbledore looked up. Harry met his eyes. He wasn't angry. He wasn't performing anything. He simply needed this man to see who was standing here, not the symbol, not the child from the doorstep, not the instrument of a plan that had been running for 10 years without Harry's consent. I know what you did, Harry said. The doorstep, the plan, what you wanted me to become. Something moved across Dumbledore's face that was the most genuine thing Harry had seen there. Not guilt, exactly, something more complicated. The expression of a man confronting the fact that the thing he built did not become what he built it to be, and is trying to decide whether that's a failure or a revelation. We need to talk, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. I believe we do. Harry held out the stone. Dumbledore took it. He held it for a moment, looking at it. Then he looked at Harry, and for the first time since platform 9 3/4, the expression was not the one of a man looking at a plan. It was the expression of a man looking at a person. Your guardian, Dumbledore said. He's in the castle. He's been in the castle since Wednesday night, Harry said. He's been waiting for me to finish down here. Of course he has, Dumbledore said, with something in his voice that wasn't entirely what Harry expected. Not irritation, something closer to rueful recognition. I should very much like to meet him. I know, Harry said. He's been looking forward to meeting you too. He picked up his wand from where he'd set it on the floor. He looked at Quirrell, still breathing, still alive. Then he walked out of the chamber, back through the logic in the chess game in the living dark of the Devil's Snare, and past Fluffy's enormous sleeping form, up through the trapdoor and the corridor and the moving staircases, back into the castle that smelled of old stone and possibility, and 1,000 years of people learning things they hadn't known before they arrived. Bruce was waiting at the top of the staircase. He looked at Harry. He looked at his hand. He saw what wasn't there, the stone, already given back, already done. Well, Bruce said. Done, Harry said. Voldemort, gone, not destroyed. Gone, he'll come back again eventually. We'll be ready. Quirrell, alive, Dumbledore has him. Bruce looked at him for another moment, doing the full assessment, physically unhurt, emotionally stable, moving well. Then he nodded. Good, he said. He wants to meet you, Harry said. I know. They stood in the corridor of Hogwarts Castle, the man in the expensive jacket and the 11-year-old with the lightning bolt scar, and the castle breathed around them, and somewhere down the stairs Dumbledore was carrying an unconscious man and a small red stone toward a night that was going to require a great deal of conversation. How are you? Bruce said. Harry thought about it honestly. Good, he said. Actually good. I know, Bruce said. That's not why I asked. Harry understood. He nodded. They walked toward whatever came next. Chapter 5. The room where plans come apart. Dumbledore's office at night was a different creature from Dumbledore's office during the day. Harry had been here once before, a brief, formal meeting in September that had lasted 12 minutes, and accomplished the specific social function of establishing that they both knew they were watching each other, without either of them saying so directly. The office in daylight was all warm gold and clever instruments, and the comfortable authority of a man entirely at home in his accumulated power. At 2 a.m, with the fire burning low and Fawkes asleep on his perch with his head tucked under one wing, it was something more stripped down, more honest maybe. The instruments still turned. The portraits of previous headmasters slept in their frames, or pretended to. The stone sat on Dumbledore's desk between them like a guest no one had formally introduced. Bruce sat across from Dumbledore with his jacket on, and his hands in his lap, and the expression Harry privately thought of as his diplomatic face, which looked like neutrality, and functioned like a complete intelligence operation running silently behind it. Harry sat beside him. Lupin had arrived 10 minutes after they had, still in his coat, moving with the rapid, precise energy of someone who had been awake waiting for news, and had come the moment it arrived. He sat to Harry's left and said nothing, and his presence in the room had a specific quality, not mediation, not advocacy, something more like witness. Dumbledore looked at Bruce. Bruce looked at Dumbledore. Harry looked at both of them and thought, this is the most contained explosion I have ever been in the room for. You've been here since Wednesday, Dumbledore said. Yes, Bruce said, in my school. In Harry's school, Bruce said, with the pleasant tone of someone making a small but precise correction. He attends here. I came to see him. You came, Dumbledore said, because Harry sent you a letter identifying a possession situation that my own instruments had not flagged. That's also true. How long have you known about Quirrell? Harry identified the possession probability in October, Bruce said. He sent me the detailed assessment in November. I've been cross-referencing it with what I know about Voldemort's known methods since then. He paused. The turban was a reasonable deduction. Soul fragments anchor to physical objects when the host body is used as a vehicle rather than a permanent residence. The smell Harry described, necrotic magical residue, is consistent with what Zatanna documented from the 1979 Leicester incident, which is in the Council's archives if you want the site. Dumbledore regarded him. You've been researching our world for some time. Since November 1981, Bruce said. Yes, something moved across Dumbledore's face. Not surprise, he was past surprise tonight, Harry thought, or was managing it with exceptional control. Something more like the recognition of scale. The moment when you discover that something you thought you were watching has been watching you back for considerably longer. I owe you an explanation, Dumbledore said. You owe Harry an explanation, Bruce said. I've already formed my own. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Harry met his eyes. He'd been thinking about this conversation for 4 years, in the way you think about something that matters, not rehearsing speeches, but working out what he actually needed from it, what would make it useful. I'm not angry, Harry said. Dumbledore waited. I want to be clear about that first, Harry said, because I think you're expecting anger, and I think if you get it, it gives you something to respond to that isn't the actual point. He leaned forward slightly. I grew up knowing everything. Bruce told me when I was 6. I've had time to understand your reasoning, and I think I do understand it. The blood protection was real. The threat to my life in the magical world was real. You needed me away from it until I was old enough to survive it. He paused. But you also needed me ignorant, small, grateful for guidance when it finally arrived. That's the part that isn't about my safety. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. You are, he said, extraordinarily perceptive for 11. I was raised well, Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes moved to Bruce. Something in that look had the quality of a reassessment that was genuinely happening rather than being performed. Yes, he said, I can see that. He was quiet again and the fire snapped once. I won't insult you by denying it. There was a shape I had in mind for you. A path I still believe, in its essential structure, was necessary for the defeat of Voldemort. The prophecy is real. The connection between you is real. The fact that you must ultimately face him is, I believe, real. I know, Harry said. You don't object to that. I object to the part where I wasn't supposed to know, Harry said. I object to arriving at the moment of choice without having been the one making choices. He sat back. I've been making my own choices since I was 6 years old. I chose to learn magic. I chose to come to Hogwarts. I walked into that chamber tonight because I decided to, not because I was maneuvered into it. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. That's the difference. I'll face Voldemort when the time comes, but I'll do it because I've decided it's right, not because a plan I wasn't consulted on brought me to the edge of it. Dumbledore held his gaze for a long time. Then slowly he did something Harry had not expected. He nodded, not the nod of concession, not the nod of a man managing a situation, a real one. That is, Dumbledore said quietly, a wiser position than the one I designed. He looked at his hands. I have a tendency, I think, toward excessive architecture. I build structures around people because I believe I can see the necessary outcome clearly, and I lose sight of the person inside the structure. He looked up. I lost sight of a great many people that way. Your mother near the end. Sirius Black, who is currently in Azkaban for a crime he did not commit. The room went very still. Lupin had gone rigid in his chair. Say that again, Lupin said. Sirius Black, Dumbledore said, and the weight of it was visible in every word, was not the Potter's secret keeper. The real secret keeper was Peter Pettigrew, who faked his own death and framed Sirius, and has been living in hiding for the last decade. He paused. I have known this for 3 years. I have been building a case sufficient to compel the Ministry to act on it. The Ministry's relationship with evidence involving Azkaban prisoners is complicated. 3 years, Lupin said. His voice was very quiet. You've known for 3 years that Sirius is innocent. I have suspected strongly for 4 and known with relative certainty for 3. Sirius has been in Azkaban for 10 years, Lupin said. I know Remus. He was James's best friend. He was Harry's godfather. The word landed in the room with its full weight. Harry felt it, godfather, a word he'd known abstractly from Bruce's files and never applied to a living person, suddenly acquiring the specific gravity of someone who was real and suffering and had been for a decade. He was my friend. I know, Dumbledore said. And you built a case, Lupin said, still in that terrible, quiet voice. You built it carefully, properly, while he sat in Azkaban. The silence had a texture now, something close to breaking. Is there enough? Bruce said. Everyone looked at him. Right now, Bruce said. Is there currently enough evidence to compel a ministry review? Dumbledore studied him. The ministry is resistant. Cornelius Fudge has a significant political investment in the narrative of Sirius Black as Voldemort's right hand. A reversal of that narrative is destabilizing. He will not move quickly. I didn't ask if Fudge would move, Bruce said. I asked if there was enough evidence. There is significant evidence, Dumbledore said carefully. Pettigrew is alive. Finding him would be challenging. He's an animagus. He takes the form of a rat. A pause. The rat, Harry said. Everyone looked at him. Ron's rat, Harry said. Scabbers. Ron's been carrying that rat since before he started Hogwarts. It was Percy's before that. He was already running it, the way a rat that old shouldn't be alive this long. The slightly wrong quality he'd noticed about it twice but filed away as a magical anomaly rather than a conclusion. How long do rats normally live? Lupin's face had gone white. 2 to 3 years, Bruce said. Scabbers is at least 12, Harry said. Ron's mentioned it, bought it at the magical menagerie when Percy was starting his first year. If Pettigrew has been hiding as a rat in the Weasley family for over a decade, Bruce said, to Dumbledore, then Ron is currently in possession of a war criminal. Dumbledore stood up from behind his desk with the swift purpose of someone who has been playing a careful long game and has just discovered that one of the pieces moved on its own. He went to the fireplace. He threw in a handful of powder and said Minerva, and McGonagall's head appeared in the flames within 15 seconds, looking sharp-eyed and unsurprised in a way that suggested she'd also been awake. The Weasley boy's rat, Dumbledore said. Ron, I need it secured. Tonight. Now. McGonagall's eyes moved past him to the room. She saw Harry, Bruce, Lupin. She processed this with the rapid competence of someone who ran a schoolhouse and had learned to adapt to information arriving in any order. Understood, she said. 5 minutes. The fire went back to normal. Bruce looked at Dumbledore. We need a ministry official who isn't Fudge, he said. Someone with authority to compel a prisoner review. Who has that? The Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Dumbledore said. Amelia Bones, she's scrupulously fair, Lupin said. His voice had recovered something, though his hands on the arms of the chair were not entirely steady. James and Lily trusted her. Can you contact her? Bruce said to Dumbledore. I can have her here by morning. Then do that. Bruce looked at his watch. It's 2:40 a.m. We have 5 hours before the castle wakes up. Let's use them. Dumbledore looked at Bruce for a moment with an expression that was, Harry thought, one of the more interesting things he'd seen all night. A great man confronting the specific experience of being efficiently organized by someone else and finding that it produced, underneath the instinctive resistance, a kind of relief. You do this well, Dumbledore said. The management of multiple moving parts. I've had practice, Bruce said. Scabbers Pettigrew made a break for it when McGonagall came for him. He'd clearly been listening. Harry worked that out later. The rat had been in the dormitory the whole time Ron had been awake and worried about Harry and Hermione on a school night, and animal hearing was sharp enough that the discussion in the common room when Harry had told them, the plan had likely been audible, and Pettigrew had been waiting for his moment. He got 3 corridors. Then he ran directly into Harry, who had expected exactly this the moment McGonagall flew to say there'd been an incident, and the rat had bolted, and who had moved the moment he heard it with the specific route selection Bruce had drilled into him for years. If you know a target's starting point and general direction, you find the intersection, not the chase. Pettigrew transformed in a dead-end corridor off the 4th floor with the desperate logic of a cornered thing, going from rat to a small, pale, sweating man with watery eyes and hands that shook and the specific smell Harry had learned to associate with the kind of fear that comes from prolonged guilt. He looked at Harry. You look like James, Pettigrew breathed. You look just, I know, Harry said. He held his wand loose in his hand, easy, not threatening, just present. You're not going to run again. Please. Pettigrew looked at the walls, the ceiling, the dead end. I had no choice. Voldemort was going to. He would have killed us all. I had no. That might be true, Harry said. I'm not the one who decides what it means. That's for Sirius Black's trial. He met Pettigrew's eyes, which is going to happen. This week, you're going to tell Amelia Bones everything you told Dumbledore, and Sirius is going to get out of Azkaban, and then what happens to you is between you and the law. A pause. But you don't run, because if you run, there's no trial and Sirius stays where he is, and I won't let that happen. Pettigrew was shaking. He looked at Harry with the desperate, searching look of a man trying to find a way out and finding none. Voldemort just got evicted from a professor's skull, Harry said. Tonight, he's not in a position to protect you. He kept his voice even. Not cruel, just true. Come with me. McGonagall arrived 30 seconds later and found Harry standing in the corridor with Pettigrew seated on the floor against the wall, wrists bound with a simple binding charm, no longer shaking, looking at the floor with the expression of a man who has, at the end of a very long road, run out of anywhere else to go. McGonagall looked at Harry. He didn't run again, Harry said. I can see that. She looked at Pettigrew, and something moved through her expression that was old and complicated, and not quite forgiveness, and not quite its opposite. Come along then, she said. Amelia Bones arrived at 6:30 in the morning. She was a square, solid woman with a monocle and close-cropped gray hair, and she walked into Dumbledore's office and took in the assembled group. Dumbledore, Bruce, Harry, Lupin, Pettigrew bound in the corner, the stone on the desk, with the focused attention of someone who has been in enough unusual situations to know that the right response is information gathering before judgment. Albus, she said. Amelia, thank you for coming. Her eyes moved to Bruce. She looked at him for a long moment. Bruce Wayne, she said. Yes, I've been wondering when the magical world was going to officially encounter you. She sat down, produced a quick quotes quill, and looked at it critically. I'll take my own notes, she decided, putting it away again. She looked at Pettigrew. Is that Peter Pettigrew, Dumbledore said. Alive and present. Right, she said, with the brisk precision of someone building a to-do list in real time. Start from the beginning. I want everything. The next 2 hours were the most exhaustive deposition Harry had ever witnessed, and he had sat through 3 separate Gotham courtroom processes with Bruce. Bones asked questions like a surgeon operated, precise, without excess, cutting directly to what mattered. She asked Pettigrew the same things 4 different ways, and his answers were consistent in their essential structure, which was the specific consistency of someone telling the truth badly rather than someone who'd rehearsed a lie well. She asked Bruce how he had come to be in possession of information about the Potters case. Bruce explained, without flourish, the chain of research from November 1981 to the present. She listened to all of it. She made notes. She looked at Harry once directly and said, You're all right. Yes, Harry said. I'm fine. The chamber, last night. Handled. She studied him. You're 11. Everyone keeps pointing that out, Harry said. Something at the corner of Amelia Bones's very serious mouth moved. Good, she said, in a tone that was compliment and professional assessment simultaneously, and went back to her notes. By 9 in the morning, she had a signed statement from Pettigrew, a detailed witness account from Bruce, Dumbledore's 3-year compiled dossier, and Lupin's testimony regarding the night of October 31st, 1981. She stood up, put everything in an evidence wallet that sealed itself with a silver clasp, and looked at Dumbledore. I'm going to the ministry now, she said. Sirius Black will have a formal review hearing by Wednesday. With what I'm taking in there, I expect it to be brief. She paused. I should tell you that this is going to cause significant political disruption. I know, Dumbledore said. Fudge will manage, Dumbledore said, with a finality that suggested he had already thought about Cornelius Fudge and had determined he was not a primary concern. Bones looked at Bruce again. Mr. Wayne, Miss Bones. The magical community is going to become aware that Harry Potter has been raised outside our world by someone with your specific profile and resources. She said it as fact, not accusation. There are people who will find that alarming. I know, Bruce said. How do you intend to handle that? Honestly, Bruce said, which will be alarming to some people regardless. She looked at him for another moment, with the expression of someone conducting a final assessment and arriving at a satisfactory result. See that it is, she said, and left. Ron was sitting outside the Gryffindor common room when Harry finally made it back up through the castle at 10 in the morning, having not slept. Hermione was beside him. They both looked up when Harry appeared at the end of the corridor, and Ron stood up with the quick movement of someone who has been sitting still from effort rather than ease, and looked at Harry with the specific focus of a person who needs to know that the people they've committed to are okay. Well, Ron said. Harry looked at him. At both of them, Ron with his open face and his steady brown eyes, and the loyalty that he carried like a natural fact, and Hermione with her sharp attention, and the specific quality she had of making the world larger by thinking carefully about it. He told them everything. Standing in the corridor outside the common room, leaning against the stone wall, voice low, Pettigrew, Bones, the trial, Sirius Black. When he finished, they were quiet for a moment. "You have a godfather," Hermione said, "apparently, who's been in prison for 10 years for something he didn't do." "Yes." She absorbed this with visible, controlled emotion. Hermione's feelings moved across her face in a specific way, strong and briefly visible, and then taken back in, processed, directed somewhere useful. "The trial," she said. "Wednesday. Is there anything we can do to—" "Bones has everything she needs," Harry said. "Bruce is going to be there. Lupin's giving testimony." He looked at his hands. "I might go." Ron looked at him. "To the trial? I want to see him, Sirius, after." He paused. "If he gets out." "He'll get out," Ron said, with the complete confidence of someone who has decided the right thing is going to happen because the alternative is unacceptable. "With all of that, he'll get out." Harry nodded. He hoped Ron was right, with the specific quality of hoping that lives next to certainty without quite touching it. "Chess game," Harry said, because he needed to say it. "Ron, last night, the chess game." Ron shrugged, but it was the shrug of someone who is trying to make something look smaller than it is. He had a bruise along his jaw from where a stone knight's gauntlet had clipped him, going down. "Wasn't a big thing." "It was," Harry said. "I knew what I was doing." "I know you did, that's why it was." Ron looked at him. Then he looked at the floor briefly in the way he did when something had landed properly and then back up. "We're good," he said. "Yeah," Harry said. "We are." Hermione reached out and hit Harry on the arm. It was gentle but precise. "Don't do things without telling us first next time," she said. "I know you told us on Thursday, but I mean right from the beginning. October, when you figured it out. You should have told us then." "I know," Harry said. "I was protecting you from—" "We don't want to be protected from it," Hermione said. "We want to help. There's a significant difference." She looked at him with that direct, clear attention. "You do that sometimes. You plan around people instead of with them, even people who have chosen to be involved." Harry sat with that for a moment because it was true, and she'd said it precisely, and precisely true things deserve to be sat with. "You sound like Bruce," he said. "Then Bruce is right about that particular thing. Don't tell him that. He already has perfect posture and extremely good memory. He doesn't need more." Hermione almost smiled. Ron fully did. The thing nobody had talked about yet, the room's worth of unaddressed tension that had been sitting patiently while everything else was handled, was Dumbledore. Harry went back to the office at noon, alone. Bruce was there and Lupin, and they both started to stand when Harry came in, and Harry looked at them briefly, and they both, reading him, sat back down. Harry stood in front of Dumbledore's desk. "I have questions," he said. "Not about the stone or Quirrell or Pettigrew, about the shape of everything." Dumbledore folded his hands. "Ask." Voldemort made Horcruxes. The office went very quiet. Fawkes, awake now, shifted on his perch and made a low sound. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. Something moved through his expression that was, Harry recognized it. He'd seen it in Bruce's face a handful of times. The expression of someone who has been carrying a weight alone and has just discovered that someone else knows it exists. "How," Dumbledore said, "did you reach that conclusion?" "The soul fragment in Quirrell," Harry said. "It wasn't his whole soul. It was thin, stretched. You could feel the absence in it." Zatanna described the quality of a complete soul and a fragmented one differently, and when I was in that chamber, what I felt was fragmented. Not a soul surviving outside a body, but a piece of one. He met Dumbledore's eyes. "He's not just diminished because his original body was destroyed. He's diminished because there are other pieces of him somewhere else. And the Horcrux theory is the only magical framework that accounts for voluntary soul fragmentation and external anchoring." Hermione found 3 references in texts that are technically restricted but were available in the Hogwarts library until fairly recently, before someone removed them. Harry paused. "Quite recently, actually." Dumbledore said nothing. "You removed them," Harry said, not accusatory, just true. "I removed them 3 years ago," Dumbledore said, "when I confirmed my suspicions about what Tom Riddle had done." He was quiet for a moment. "You are correct, there are multiple Horcruxes. I have been locating them with considerable difficulty for several years." "How many?" "I believe 7 in total. The original intent. One was destroyed in 1943 by Tom Riddle himself. He may not have realized what he destroyed. One is likely the diary you'll hear about in coming years if certain events proceed as I anticipate." He stopped. Something in his expression had gone careful in a specific way. "There is one more that presents a particular complication." Harry waited. Dumbledore looked at him with the specific expression of a man who has been deciding how long to carry something alone and has reached the end of that particular road. "On the night Voldemort cast the killing curse at you," Dumbledore said, and the curse rebounded. The destruction of his primary body released a fragment of soul. The killing curse itself, cast with such force and fracturing the caster's already divided soul further, created an unintended anchor. The office was very still. The fragment, Dumbledore said carefully, anchored itself to the only living vessel in the room. Harry looked at him. There is a Horcrux, Dumbledore said, inside you. The words sat in the room like stones dropping through water. Bruce was on his feet. Wait, Harry said. He said it quietly and clearly, and Bruce, who had trained himself over decades to read Harry's voice as carefully as Harry read everyone else's, stopped. Harry thought about it. He thought about it with the full attention he brought to problems that mattered, not reacting, not going to the emotional register first, but actually thinking, looking at it from every angle, checking the structure of it. A Horcrux requires the maker to willingly murder, Harry said. Voldemort's soul was already fragmented before that night. The fragment that attached to me wasn't placed deliberately. No, Dumbledore said, it was accidental, which makes it structurally different from the others, possibly extractable in ways the others are not. Possibly, Harry said. I have been researching this for years, Dumbledore said, and the weight in his voice was the weight of someone who has sat alone with this knowledge and turned it over and over and found no version of it that doesn't cost something enormous. I believe there is a way. The process is complicated, Harry said, and dangerous. But possible, I believe so, yes. Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands. He thought about the chamber last night, the warmth of the stone in his palm, Voldemort's thin, furious voice. He thought about his mother's protection, blazing white-hot at the contact. He thought about the photograph in the wooden frame, his parents' mid-laugh, full of life. He thought about Bruce reading case files in the cave until 4 a.m. on November 1st, 1981. He thought about Clark taking him up to where the earth curved, and the quality of distance that didn't mean small. He thought about Ron saying, "Don't make it weird," after offering to sacrifice himself at a chess board. He thought about Hermione saying, "You plan around people instead of with them." Then he looked up at Dumbledore. "You were going to let me reach a point," Harry said, "where you would have had to tell me that destroying Voldemort required destroying the piece of him inside me, and you were going to let me make that choice. Alone, at the end." Dumbledore did not deny it. "You were going to build me toward a sacrifice," Harry said. "That was always the final architecture." "I believed," Dumbledore said, and the belief was genuine, which was the thing about him, the genuinely complicated thing, that a child who grew up knowing that might not be able to face it, might run from it, that the not knowing was a mercy. Or, Harry said, a way to make sure I didn't have time to find another option. Silence. "There is another option," Bruce said from where he was standing. His voice was very controlled. "Or we find one, that is not a question. The Horcrux research is," Dumbledore began. "Give me everything you have on it," Bruce said. "All of it, tonight, your notes, your sources, every line of research you've done for the last however many years." He looked at Dumbledore with the absolute flat certainty of someone who has made a decision that is not subject to revision. "There are people in my world who work in disciplines that have no equivalent in yours. Zatanna has contacts across 3 magical traditions. Clark has access to Kryptonian biochemical knowledge that's 5,000 years ahead of anything on this planet." He paused. "We will find the option, and Harry will choose it, fully informed, with time." Dumbledore looked at Bruce for a long moment. He looked old, Harry thought, not in the physical sense. He'd always looked ancient, but in the sense of carrying something that had been heavy for a very long time. "You love him," Dumbledore said. It wasn't an accusation or a revelation. It was recognition. "Yes," Bruce said. "That was not in my calculations," Dumbledore said. "That a man with your profile would, I assumed the arrangement would be guardianship in the formal sense. Protection and provision. I did not anticipate." "No," Bruce said. "You didn't." Harry sat in the middle of all of it, the office, the fire, the spinning instruments, the weight of what he'd just learned sitting in him like a stone he was deciding the shape of, and felt underneath it all something he hadn't expected to feel in this moment. He felt certain, not that it would be easy. Not that there wasn't cost ahead, but certain in the sense of knowing where he stood and who was standing with him, and that combination being, in every way that mattered, enough. "I need you to do something," Harry said to Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at him. "Be honest with me from now on," Harry said. "Not the managed honesty of someone deciding what I'm ready for. Actually honest. Everything you know when you know it in the order you know it." He paused. "I'm not asking for a perfect record. I'm asking for a change in approach." Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. "That is," he said finally, "a harder request than it sounds." "I know," Harry said. "Do it anyway." Another long silence. Fawkes made a low sound on his perch. Outside the office windows, Scotland was bright with late June sun, the grounds green and open, the castle humming its old stone light. Yes, Dumbledore said, I will try. Good, Harry said. He stood up. I'm going to sleep for approximately 12 hours. When I wake up, I want to write a letter to Sirius Black. Can you make sure it reaches him in Azkaban? I'll see to it personally, Dumbledore said. Harry nodded. He looked at Bruce. Bruce crossed the room and stood next to him, and they walked out of the office together, down the spiral staircase into the corridor below. The castle went on around them late morning, somewhere distant the sound of students in the grounds. Are you all right? Bruce said when they were alone. No, Harry said honestly, not completely. I know, but I will be. I know that too. They walked in silence for a moment. The corridor turned and the light through a window caught the stone and made it warm. Harry thought about a fragment of Voldemort's soul living in him for 10 years, this passenger he hadn't known about, and felt a strange absence of horror at the idea. Not because it wasn't serious, because it was just a problem. A serious problem with layers, with risk, with cost, but a problem. And he had people. Clark's going to want to come when we start the Horcrux research, Harry said. I know, he's already going to be impossible about it. Zatanna will have opinions. She always has opinions. Alfred's going to make tea and then pretend he isn't worried. Obviously, Harry almost smiled. When Sirius is hearing, Wednesday, Bruce said, I'll be there. Tell him about me, Harry said. Before I write, tell him just that I know who he is and that I'm fine and that I want to meet him. I will. And Bruce, yeah, Harry stopped walking. He turned and looked at him, this man who had read case files until 4 a.m, who had picked up a baby from a cold doorstep without a plan, who had learned every book on child development and discarded them all in favor of simply paying attention, who had never once in 10 years made Harry feel like anything other than the most important thing in the room. I know you didn't plan it this way, Harry said. Any of it. I know it wasn't a choice you made with the full information. No, Bruce said, it wasn't. But I need you to know, Harry said, that every part of it, the manor, Alfred, Clark, the farm, Zatanna, all of it was exactly right. For me, it was exactly right. Bruce looked at him. He didn't say anything. There were no words available that would have been equal to it, and Bruce was, among his many qualities, someone who understood the weight of silence and didn't try to fill it with inadequate sound. He put his hand on Harry's shoulder. They stood in the corridor of Hogwarts Castle in the late June morning, with Sirius Black's hearing 4 days away, and a Horcrux problem that would take years to solve, and a dark wizard somewhere in the world gathering himself piece by piece, and the summer ahead of them warm and open and full of work to do. Harry let the hand on his shoulder be what it was. Then they kept walking. Chapter 6, What We Choose to Be the Ministry of Magic on a Wednesday morning, had the specific energy of an institution that had been told something inconvenient and was trying to decide whether to believe it. Harry had been in impressive buildings before. Wayne Manor was impressive. The Fortress of Solitude, which Clark had taken him to twice, was impressive in the way that things built by a dead civilization for purposes you couldn't entirely name were impressive, vast and cold, and carrying the specific loneliness of the last of something. The Ministry was impressive in a completely different register. It was impressive the way bureaucracy is impressive when it has been given enough marble and enough gold and enough centuries to convince itself that its own importance is a natural law. The atrium was tall and golden and humming with the movement of 100 people who all believed they were doing something necessary. Fireplaces along the wall discharged wizards in robes every 30 seconds. The golden fountain in the center threw light in rotating patterns across the floor. It was beautiful and slightly oppressive, and Harry walked through it beside Bruce with the easy confidence of someone who had been taught that the correct response to an environment designed to make you feel small was to simply decline to feel small. People looked at him. Not the platform 9 3/4 look that had been surprise, the electric recognition of a name appearing in person. This was different. This was the look of people who had spent a decade with a certain story about Harry Potter, the poor orphan, the hidden child, the symbol waiting in the wings, suddenly confronted with the actual person, who was 11 years old and walked like he meant it and stood next to Bruce Wayne, and none of that computed against the story. Harry let them look. Lupin was waiting at the elevator bank with Amelia Bones, who had the crisp, purposeful bearing of someone who had spent the last 4 days doing an enormous amount of work and intended for it to matter. She looked at Harry and Bruce with the specific nod of a person who is professionally satisfied but isn't going to make a production of it. The hearing begins at 9, she said. The Wisengamot has full attendance. Fudge made sure of that, thinking it would consolidate his position. Something at the corner of her mouth suggested what she thought of that miscalculation. He didn't anticipate the quality of the evidence package. How's he taking it? Bruce said. He took it the way Cornelius always takes being wrong, Bones said, which is to say he's looking for a narrative in which he isn't. She gestured toward the elevator. He'll manage. He has to, she paused, looking at Harry. You don't need to be in the chamber for the hearing itself. You can wait in my office if you prefer. I'd like to be there, Harry said. She studied him. It may be there will be discussion of that night. Halloween 1981, your parents. I know, Harry said. I've known about that night since I was 6. I can sit through a legal proceeding about it. Bones looked at him for another moment, then at Bruce, then back. Come along then, she said, and led them into the elevator. Courtroom 10 was below ground, which Harry gathered was where the serious proceedings happened. It had the quality of a room built to handle weight, high ceilings, tiered benches in a semicircle stone-worn smooth, by centuries of people sitting in it with consequential things on their minds. The Wisengamot filled the upper tiers in their plum robes, 50 faces tracking the entrance of each new arrival. Harry sat in the gallery with Bruce beside him and Lupin on his other side. Sirius Black was brought in at 9:05. Harry had seen photographs. Bruce's files had included several, the ones from before, where Sirius was dark-eyed and laughing, and clearly someone for whom the business of being alive was conducted at full volume. And the ones from after, the Azkaban intake photograph, which Harry had looked at once and put away, because the person in it had been so thoroughly removed from the person in the earlier ones that looking at both in sequence felt like a form of violence. What walked into Courtroom 10 was neither of those people exactly. He was thin in the sustained way of someone who had been inadequately fed for years. His hair was long and tangled. His face had the quality of something that had been through weather that should have destroyed it and had not quite, held together by something more stubborn than circumstance. His eyes were dark and still had the intelligence in them, and when they moved around the courtroom, they moved with the quick, precise attention of someone who has not, despite everything, stopped paying attention. He looked at the Wisengamot with an expression that was not quite defiance and not quite hope. Something in between, the expression of a man who has decided to let the facts speak because he no longer has the energy to perform. Then his eyes found Harry. He went completely still. Harry looked back at him. He didn't look away. He sat forward slightly, in the involuntary way of someone moving towards something, and he saw the moment Sirius Black understood who he was, not Harry Potter the symbol, but Harry specifically, alive and present and here by choice. The recognition hit him visibly, moved through him like a wave, and what came out the other side of it on his face was something raw and enormous and quickly, carefully managed. Sirius looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then he looked at the Wisengamot and sat down in the chair at the center of the room, and the chains on the armrests didn't move to bind him, which Bones had apparently arranged, and the hearing began. It was thorough and it was fast, because Amelia Bones was running it, and Amelia Bones did not waste time. Pettigrew gave his testimony under Veritaserum, which removed the variable of performance and left only the bare, ugly structure of what had happened, the switch of secret keepers, the betrayal, the fake death, the rat. He spoke without meeting anyone's eyes, in the flat voice of someone who has spent so long with what they've done that it has become just a fact they carry. The courtroom was very quiet during his testimony. Lupin spoke after. He'd prepared for this. Harry had seen him at his desk the previous 2 nights, writing by lamplight with the careful deliberateness of someone getting something exactly right, and he gave his testimony with the steady, particular quality of a man telling a hard truth he has full command of. He described the night. He described what he'd believed for 10 years and why. He described finding out the truth 4 days ago in Dumbledore's office with a directness that didn't spare himself. Bruce was last among the witnesses. He gave his testimony with the crisp, complete precision of someone who has presented evidence in hostile contexts before and knows exactly which details carry and which ones don't. He laid out the chain of research from November 1981 forward. He documented the misdirection of the location instruments. He presented 2 independent magical analyses of Pettigrew's current rat form that he'd somehow commissioned and received overnight, which Bones received without visible surprise, suggesting Bruce had told her they were coming. Fudge interrupted twice. Both times Bones looked at him with an expression that ended the interruption. When the Wisengamot voted, it was 41-7. Sirius Black, not guilty. Immediate release. Full restoration of assets and standing. Ministry formal apology. Fudge delivered this with the expression of a man swallowing something structural, to be entered into the permanent record. Sirius sat in his chair in the center of the room and looked at the vote count on the board above the Wisengamot benches for a long moment. Then he put his face in his hands, not crying exactly. Or maybe exactly that. the specific release of someone who has been holding something for so long that letting it go is indistinguishable from collapse. Harry watched him. He felt something in his chest that had no clean name, something between grief and recognition, and the fierce, uncomplicated wanting of someone who has been told a person exists and wants them to be okay. They gave Sirius an hour with the Ministry healers and a clean set of robes before anyone was allowed to see him. Harry spent the hour in Bones's office with Bruce and Lupin, largely in silence that was comfortable in the way silence becomes after something significant has concluded. Bones brought tea. Bruce drank his and looked at the wall in the focused way of someone running through the next 6 problems. Lupin held his cup and looked out the window at the atrium below. "What happens to him now?" Harry asked. "He has a house," Lupin said. "Grimmauld Place, it won't be comfortable exactly, but it's his." He paused. "He has money. The Black family estates were significant." Another pause longer. "He has people now, that's the most important thing. He can come to Smallville for the summer," Harry said. Lupin looked at him. "If he wants to, Clark and Martha won't mind. And he needs to be somewhere that doesn't feel like a continuation of the last decade." Harry looked at his hands. "Being somewhere entirely different helps. I know that I just know it." Lupin nodded slowly. "I'll suggest it to him, when he's—" A knock at the door. One of Bones's assistants leaned in. "He's asking for Mr. Potter," she said. Specifically, he was quite insistent about that particular word, specifically. Harry stood up. Bruce started to stand. Harry looked at him. Bruce sat back down. The room they'd put Sirius in was small and unremarkable, which was the Ministry's version of privacy, not comfortable but contained. He was sitting on a low chair with his hands on his knees, in the clean robes that were slightly too large for how thin he was, and he looked up when Harry came in with the expression of someone who has been practicing for a moment for an hour, and has just realized no practice was relevant. Harry sat down in the chair across from him. They looked at each other. "You're tall," Sirius said. His voice was rough from disuse, still carrying the quality of someone recalibrating what their voice was for. James was tall, eventually. "I've heard," Harry said. "You have his hair." He swallowed. "And Lily's eyes. I knew the second I saw you in there. Couldn't have been anyone else." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what to say to you for about 10 years, longer, since before I went in." He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Everything I came up with sounds terrible now." "Then don't say it," Harry said. "Just talk." Sirius looked at him. "Talk like I'm a person you're meeting," Harry said. "Not like you're making amends to me for something that wasn't your fault, and not like you're trying to decide whether I'm what you hoped." He met his eyes directly. "I'm Harry. Tell me something about my dad that nobody else would tell me." Sirius stared at him for a moment. Then something in him released, something large and long-held, and he sat back in the chair, and for the first time he looked like a person recovering rather than a person surviving. "He used to hum," Sirius said. "Off-key always, completely unaware he was doing it, during exams, during Quidditch practice. During one time he hummed through an entire confrontation with Snape and neither of them acknowledged it. It was the most extraordinary thing I've ever witnessed." The corner of his mouth moved. He would have been mortified if you told him. He thought he was perfectly musical. Harry felt something open in him. What did he hum? Muggle pop music, mostly. He'd grown up in a half-blood family. He had the radio. Lily loved that about him. Sirius's voice had found its register now, warmer, more alive. She used to tease him about it. He'd say he had perfect pitch. She'd say that if that was perfect pitch, she'd hate to hear imperfect pitch. He'd hum louder. He shook his head slowly, and the movement had both grief and love in it. They were the best people I knew, both of them, the best I've ever known." Harry nodded. He sat with it, his father humming off-key through everything, entirely unaware, perfectly happy. "Bruce Wayne," Sirius said after a moment. He's good," Harry said. He's not easy to explain, but he's good. He picked you up off a doorstep. He saw Dumbledore walk away and decided not to. That's the most Gryffindor thing I've ever heard from someone who apparently dresses as a giant bat." Harry grinned. "Don't tell him that. He'll just look at you." "Does the look work?" "It works on everyone else. I'm slightly immune from proximity." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. The look had the specific quality of someone finding something they'd stopped believing still existed. "You're going to be incredible," he said. "You already are, you know that." "I know I'm trying," Harry said. "That's the same thing," Sirius said. "With the Potters, it was always the same thing." They talked for another 40 minutes, and by the end of it Sirius was sitting differently, forward in the chair rather than back, hands moving when he talked, the full animation of someone who had been locked in stillness for too long starting to come back into his body. He accepted the Smallville invitation, with the specific surprise of someone who had not expected to be offered anywhere to go, and then with a warmth that was enormous and uncontrolled, and entirely without embarrassment. When Harry stood to leave, Sirius stood too, and the handshake he offered became something more, a brief, encompassing, very real hug from a man who had been James Potter's best friend for 20 years, and was meeting the piece of James that had survived and was, somehow, this specific extraordinary person. Harry hugged him back. He let it last as long as it needed to. The train back to Hogwarts ran on a different line than the Hogwarts Express, a ministry connection that deposited them at Hogsmeade Station in the late afternoon. The mountains were cloudlit, Scotland doing its magnificent indifferent best with the sky. Bruce walked beside Harry toward the castle, and they were quiet for a while, and the quiet had the quality of a day that had given them both things to carry and wasn't requiring them to name them yet. "Clark called while you were with Sirius," Bruce said. "What did he say?" "He said he's proud of you and he'll be at the farm when you arrive on the 22nd, and he's already talked to Martha about the guest room for Sirius, and she's already made curtains." Harry looked at him. "He called Martha before we even asked Sirius. He said he had a feeling. He always has a feeling. He's rarely wrong." "No," Harry agreed. "He's rarely wrong." He looked at the castle ahead of them, its towers catching the late light. "What are you going to do about the Horcrux research?" "Zatanna is already pulling everything she can access across 3 magical traditions," Bruce said. "I have a call with a theoretical physicist at Star Labs next week who's been doing work on quantum state isolation that has potential applications to soul fragment extraction." He paused. "That might take some explaining on his end. What will you tell him? Something adjacent to the truth. I've found that adjacent usually suffices." He glanced at Harry. "There's also someone in the Tibetan magical tradition, an old contact from a year I spent in Kathmandu, who has historical texts on soul mechanics that predate the Western tradition by several thousand years. I've been in correspondence." Harry looked at him. "You started this before Wednesday." "I started this in November," Bruce said, "when Zatanna first told me about the Horcrux theory and I began to consider the possibility that it was relevant." "November of this year, November of 1991. Harry stopped walking. Bruce stopped beside him. "You've been researching Horcrux extraction," Harry said, "since I was 14 months old." "I've been researching everything that might matter," Bruce said, with the particular quiet of someone for whom this is simply a fact. "I didn't know what would be relevant. I wanted to be prepared for the range." Harry stood in the middle of the path to Hogwarts in the Scottish mountains in the late afternoon with this man, who had picked him up off a cold doorstep and taken him home and then spent 10 years preparing for every possible version of what that meant, and felt something move through him that was too large and too specific to have a single name. "You are," Harry said, "completely unreasonable." "I know," Bruce said. "That's not a criticism." "I know that too." Harry started walking again. Bruce walked beside him. The castle got closer, warm and lit in the early evening, the windows beginning to glow as the light outside dimmed. Somewhere inside Ron was probably at dinner already, eating with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had ridden a magical chess piece into a stone wall the previous week and was firmly back in the business of recovery. Somewhere inside Hermione had probably already started her summer reading list. Lupin would be in his office and Hagrid in his hut, and the whole extraordinary apparatus of this place going about its life. "I need to ask you something," Harry said. "Ask, Dumbledore." "The honest arrangement. He agreed to it, and I believe he means it, but he'll struggle," Bruce said. "He's been operating alone at the center of this for 50 years. The habit of managed information is deeply structural in him. He'll mean to be honest, and he'll fail at it sometimes without noticing. So what do? We build a relationship in which the failure is visible enough to be corrected," Bruce said. "We make ourselves useful to him in ways that require genuine information flow, so the structural incentive for honesty exists. And we maintain our own independent channels, so we're not dependent on his disclosure for critical information." "That's not fully trusting him." "No," Bruce agreed. "It's appropriately trusting him, which is different." He glanced at Harry. "He's not a villain, Harry. He's a man who's been right often enough that he stopped checking whether he was right. That's fixable, but it requires sustained pressure and a few significant failures." A pause. "He had one tonight. He'll be more honest for it for a while. We'll see what the next one reveals." Harry thought about this. It was very Bruce, not cynical, not idealistic, just precise, calibrated to the actual human being rather than the story about them. "What about Voldemort?" Harry said. "The real return." "Not Quirrell, the actual return with a body." "That's coming," Bruce said. "The Horcrux problem means he can't be permanently gone until they're all destroyed. We have time, but not unlimited time." He was quiet for a moment. When it happens, we face it the same way we faced tonight, with preparation, with people, with information. Not like Dumbledore planned it. Definitely not like Dumbledore planned it. Voldemort is going to be significant, Harry said, because he wanted to name it clearly rather than approach it sideways. When he's back with a body, he's going to be formidable, Bruce said. Yes. And we're going to be prepared for formidable. You're not worried. Of course I'm worried, Bruce said. Worry and preparation are the same activity. I've been doing both. Harry nodded. They reached the castle entrance. The great doors were open to the evening air, warm light spilling out from inside. Harry could hear dinner in the great hall, the specific acoustic blend of 400 people existing simultaneously, plates and voices, and the occasional bang of something going dramatically wrong in the Ravenclaw section. I'm going to get Voldemort's Horcruxes, Harry said, not as announcement, not as bravado. As a statement of intention, the same way he'd always stated intentions, clearly, completely, to someone who deserved to hear it directly. I know, Bruce said, all of them, and then I'm going to finish this. I know that too. On my terms, Harry said. Not Dumbledore's terms, not the prophecy's terms, because I've decided it's right. Bruce looked at him. Yes, Bruce said, that's exactly it. They went inside. The great hall was exactly what it always was, enormous and candlelit and full of the controlled chaos of a school finishing its year with the loose, relieved energy of people who have been working hard and are nearly at the end of it. Harry came in through the side entrance and found Ron and Hermione at the Gryffindor table already. Ron looked up. He looked at Harry's face, reading it with the quick intuitive attention he applied to things that mattered to him. Good, he said. Good, Harry said. He sat down. He's out. Full acquittal, he's coming to the farm this summer. Ron absorbed this. Your godfather. Yeah, he's real. He is. Ron nodded slowly, taking it in. Is he? He paused, trying to frame it carefully, which was, Harry had learned, Ron's tell for when he was being delicate about something. Is he okay from being in there? He will be, Harry said. He's starting to be. Ron seemed satisfied with that. He went back to his dinner with the ease of someone who has established the important facts and doesn't need to perform anything further about them. Hermione had been quiet. She was looking at Harry with the evaluating attention she brought to new information, but underneath it something warmer. The trial was fair, she said. Amelia Bones ran it, Harry said. It was scrupulously fair. And the evidence held. All of it. She nodded. Something settled in her expression. Good, she said, with the specific, complete satisfaction of someone for whom the word good carries its full weight. Harry looked down the table. Around them the noise of the hall moved and ran, Neville laughing at something, the twins sending something small and smoking toward Percy, McGonagall not looking but aware. The end of a year. The end of the first year, his first year, in this place that had been his parents' and that had become, in 9 months, his own. He thought about September 1st. The platform, the scarlet engine, the feeling of two worlds pressing against each other. He thought about the Sorting Hat saying that almost never happens. He thought about Malfoy on the train saying you're not what I expected and sitting down, and the Malfoy he'd spoken to twice since then. Carefully, briefly, in corridors, still a prat, still carrying his father's opinions like hand-me-downs he hadn't tried on yet, but watching Harry with the specific attention of someone whose framework is developing cracks and who hasn't decided whether to repair them or let them break open. He thought about Quirrell's classroom, every week, performing normal with the entire steady surface of himself, while underneath tracking the wrongness like a compass pointing at something cold. He thought about the mirror. He thought about what it had shown him, not the stone, not first. His parents, Bruce and Alfred and Clark and all of them together. That had been his deepest desire, showing up before anything else, before strategy and before prophecy and before the practical need of keeping the stone safe. Just everyone present and choosing to be and him in the middle of it. That was worth fighting for. That was what choosing felt like from the inside. He picked up his fork. Hermione, he said. Yes. Next year, what are you expecting to be hardest? She lit up. She couldn't help it. The question engaged something in her that was simply, essentially her, this person who had decided the world was interesting and was prepared to prove it rigorously. Theoretically, the progression from year 1 to year 2 involves a significant jump in transfiguration complexity. The jump from inanimate to animate transfiguration is technically the most demanding conceptual shift in the standard curriculum, and most students, right, Ron said, so hard. Hard is the answer. We knew hard was the answer. I was being precise. You're always precise. That's different from answering the question. Precision is answering the. What's hard and what's precise are different things. Hermione, one is a difficulty rating and one is a level of detail. They're not mutually. Harry sat and listened to them argue with the warm, full feeling of someone who has found the right people and knows it. He let the argument run because it was going nowhere bad. It was just them being them, Hermione's precision and Ron's directness pushing against each other and producing something better than either alone. Down the table, Neville Longbottom caught Harry's eye and waved, cheerful and slightly lopsided, a smear of something on his cheek that was probably from herbology and hadn't been noticed yet. Harry waved back. At the staff table, Lupin looked up from his dinner and found Harry across the hall and gave him a small nod that carried everything it needed to carry. Harry nodded back. Dumbledore, at the center of the staff table, was looking at his plate. He looked like a man thinking about something significant, which was most likely his default state, but there was a quality to it tonight that was different, less the look of a man managing a plan and more the look of a man revising one. He looked up once and found Harry across the hall, and what moved between them was not the careful mutual surveillance of September, but something different, older, more honest. Harry looked back at him steadily. Dumbledore inclined his head. Harry inclined his. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't alliance, and it wasn't the beginning of trust exactly. It was the agreement to be honest with each other going forward, which was its own specific thing, more useful than trust that hadn't been earned yet. It would build from here or it wouldn't. Harry was prepared for either possibility and committed to influencing the outcome. He looked back at his dinner. Bruce left the next morning. They stood at the main entrance in the early light, the ground silver with dew, the castle behind Harry, and the path down to Hogsmeade ahead of Bruce. It was always like this at the end of term, the departure, the return to Wayne Manor and Smallville, the summer that was both its own thing and preparation for the next year. Harry was used to it. The leaving was never a loss because the returning was always certain. But this particular morning had a quality the previous ones hadn't. The Horcrux research is active, Bruce said. I'll have initial results from Zatanna before August. I know. Sirius will be at the farm from the 1st of July. I'll check in on him before you arrive. I know. Clark is being Clark, Harry said. Yes, I know. Bruce looked at him. I know all of that, Harry said. I know you're going to work on it, and I know everyone's going to be there. And I know you're going to have 17 different contingency frameworks ready by the time I get off the Hogwarts Express. He stepped forward and hugged him, fully, both arms, the way he'd hugged Sirius yesterday, letting it last as long as it needed to. He felt Bruce's arms go around him with the immediate completeness of someone for whom this was simply real. I just wanted to say thank you, for all of it. Before everything gets operational again, Bruce held on for a moment, then he said very quietly, you don't have to thank me. I know, Harry said. I'm doing it anyway. He stepped back. He looked at Bruce in the early morning light, this man who had built him a life from a cold doorstep and a decision and 10 years of absolute, relentless, completely unperformed love. Go, Harry said. Alfred's going to start calling. Alfred has already called twice. Then definitely go. Bruce turned and walked down the path toward Hogsmeade. Harry stood in the entrance of the castle and watched him go, and felt the specific quality of that watching, not loss, not worry. Something more like certainty, the knowledge that what was walking away was coming back, and what was staying was solid, and both things were true simultaneously. Later that morning, Harry sat on the slope above the lake. It was the first genuinely warm morning since April, Scotland doing something that wasn't quite summer but was clearly attempting it, the sun on the water making the lake look like hammered silver. Somewhere below, the giant squid was doing something languid just beneath the surface. The castle rose behind him, enormous and permanent. He had his parents' photograph in his hand. He looked at it. His mother was mid-laugh again, the same one, the same moment of whatever wonderful thing she was watching happen. His father's arm easy around her shoulders. Both of them full of a future they were completely confident in, the way you're confident in the future at 20 when you don't know what it will cost. They'd made him possible. Their lives and their love and ultimately their deaths had made him possible, and he'd spent 10 years understanding that with his mind. But sitting here on the slope above the lake on a warm morning at the end of his first year at the school they'd both loved, he felt it for the first time in his chest as a fully simple thing, not a debt. Not a responsibility, just them making him and him being here because of it. He sat with that for a while. Then he put the photograph carefully in his inside pocket, next to the letter Bruce had written him on his 6th birthday, the one that started I want to tell you who you are and took 4 pages and was the most important thing Harry had ever read, even now, even with everything he'd learned since. He kept them both there, next to each other, the two of them. He heard footsteps on the slope behind him. 2 sets, Ron's slightly uneven walk, Hermione's more precise, the cadence of people who knew where they were going. They sat down beside him without being asked. Ron on his left and Hermione on his right, looking out at the lake with the comfortable ease of people who had been through something real together and come out the other side still choosing each other. Summer, Ron said. Summer, Harry agreed. You're going to that farm in Kansas. Kansas, yeah, then back to Wayne Manor for August. With your godfather. Yeah, Ron nodded. He was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant he was about to say something he'd been thinking about for a while. My mum wants to meet you, he said. I may have written her about you. A lot, over the year. How much is a lot? She knows what house you were sorted into, that you're good at chess, that you defeated a possessed defense teacher with your bare hand and negotiated with a partial Voldemort about it, and that you have a godfather who's just got out of Azkaban. He paused. She may have some questions. I'd like to meet her, Harry said. Ron seemed quietly delighted. He tried not to show it. He showed it anyway. My parents want to meet yours, Hermione said, and then stopped, reworking it. Your guardian, Bruce. They want to meet Bruce. Your parents want to meet Bruce Wayne. They want to make sure, Hermione said carefully, that the environment you're being raised in is that someone who dressed as a large bat to address crime is that. She stopped. My mother's a dentist and my father's a dentist, and they have a very specific idea of what a safe environment for children involves. And Batman doesn't fit it. Batman doesn't fit it, Hermione confirmed. But everything I've told them about how you actually are has, they've adjusted their assessment. They'd like to complete it. I'll ask Bruce, Harry said. He'll say yes. He likes people who do thorough due diligence. Good, Hermione said, with the satisfaction of someone resolving a problem. They sat on the slope above the lake in the late morning sun. Around them the year was ending, and the summer was waiting. And beyond the summer was a second year and a third, and all the years after, the Horcruxes, the research, Voldemort coming back at the end of some road they couldn't fully see yet, everything that was going to be asked of them. Harry sat in the middle of all of it and felt with complete clarity that he was ready for it, not because it wasn't going to be hard. Not because there wasn't cost ahead. He knew there was. He'd known since Dumbledore's office. He carried it as a fact rather than a fear. Not because the prophecy had chosen him and the magic had marked him and the story had been written before he could read, because he had chosen it. Eyes open, fully informed, knowing every price on the table. He had looked at a world that needed protecting and people he loved who would stand beside him and a dark thing at the end of the road that had to be faced, and he had decided. That was the difference. That was everything. The lake went on doing what it did. The castle stood. The morning kept going, warm and unremarkable, and full of ordinary things. Harry Potter, the boy who had been left on a cold doorstep and picked up again, who had been raised by a billionaire vigilante, and a Kryptonian journalist in a farmhouse in Kansas and a manor in Gotham, who had been taught magic by Zatanna Zatara and patience by Alfred Pennyworth, and the difference between distance and size by a man who could see the curve of the earth from 40,000 feet. Harry Potter sat on a hillside in Scotland with his two best friends and let the morning be what it was. Simple, warm, chosen. He was 11 years old and the world ahead of him was enormous, and he was, in every way that mattered, ready to meet it. Below them, the lake moved in the light. Above them, the sky went on in every direction without limit. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. In the cave beneath Wayne Manor, a computer screen glowed in the dark. On it, 14 active research threads, each building toward the same answer from different directions. 7 Horcrux locations, 3 confirmed, 4 theoretical. A timeline for Voldemort's next viable return, conservative estimate 3 years. A contact list: Zatanna, Constantine, Amelia Bones, Remus Lupin, Sirius Black, the Star Labs physicist, the man in Tibet, Clark. And one file simply titled Harry, updated weekly, ongoing. In it, everything Bruce had learned in 10 years about what it meant to raise someone who was going to have to carry something heavy and needed to be strong enough to carry it freely. He'd never shown Harry the file, not because it was a secret, because some things you do for the person without needing the person to know you did them. That, too, was what love looked like. The screen glowed on in the quiet cave, waiting, ready.